Hi. This is Novel Admire. Welcome to my channel. Have fun. Release that witch. Chapter 1. From today onwards, I am a royal prince. Cheng Yan could sense that someone was calling him. Your Highness, please wake up. He turned his head away, but the sounds he'd heard didn't disappear, they actually proceeded to get even louder instead. Then, he felt someone gently tug on his sleeve. Your Highness, my royal prince. Cheng Yan's eyes snapped open. His familiar surroundings had disappeared, his work desk was gone, and the familiar walls filled with post-its were gone. They'd all been replaced by a strange landscape. A round public square that was enclosed by small brick houses, and the gallows that were erected in the center of the square now dominated his field of view. He himself sat at a table across the square from the gallows. There wasn't a soft rotating office chair under his butt, but a cold hard iron chair instead. There was also a group of people sitting with him and watching him intently. Several of them were dressed as medieval lords and ladies from those western flicks, and were trying to suppress their giggles. What the hell? Wasn't I just rushing to finish my mechanical blueprints before the deadline? Cheng Yan was at a loss as he thought to himself. For 3 consecutive days, he had been working overtime. Thus, he was both mentally and physically at his limit. He could only vaguely remember that his heartbeat had become unsteady, and that he just wanted to lie down on his desk and take a break. Your Highness, please declare your ruling. The speaker was the one that had secretly tugged on his sleeve. His face was old, seemingly in his 50s or 60s, and he wore a white robe. At first glance, he looked a bit like Gandalf, from The Lord of the Rings. Am I dreaming? Cheng Yan thought as he licked his dry lips. Ruling? What ruling? As he quickly glanced around, his confusion was swept away. The people surrounding him were all looking in the direction of the center of the square, at the gallows. Many townspeople were also in the plaza and were waving their fists while they shouted and even threw an occasional stone towards the gallows and the figure on it. Cheng Yan had only ever seen such an ancient instrument of death in movies. The gallows consisted of 2 pillars extending upwards about 4 meters from a raised base, with a crossbeam extending between the 2 pillars with a thick yellow hemp rope around the middle of the crossbeam. One end of the rope was tied to the gallows, and the other end was tied into a noose around a prisoner's neck. In this strange dream Cheng Yan thought he was in, he found that he was able to see everything clearly. Usually, he'd even need to wear his glasses to see the words on a computer screen, but now Cheng Yan could see every detail of the gallows, which were 50 meters away, without his glasses. The prisoner atop the gallows had their head completely covered with a hood and had their hands tied behind their back. They wore dirty gray clothes that were little more than rags draped over a frame so thin, it seemed you could easily wrap your hand around their exposed ankle. Cheng Yan judged the prisoner to be female by her faintly bulging chest, and looked on as she stood there shivering in the chilly wind, but still trying to stand up straight to face her fate on her feet. Alright then, Cheng Yan thought to himself, what crime did this woman commit that caused so many people to be so outraged, and to wait for her to be hanged with such rage and hostility? Cheng Yan's memories appeared, almost as if they'd suddenly been turned on, and he realized the cause of the situation, and the answer to his question, at almost the same time. She was a witch. She was considered to have fallen to the temptation of the devil and was known as an incarnation of evil. Your Highness? The Gandalf lookalike cautiously urged. Cheng Yan glanced at the old man. Well, Cheng Yan's new memories told him, the old man wasn't called Gandalf, his real name was Brav, and he was an assistant minister of finance dispatched by the Roland's father to assist in the governing of the territory. Cheng Yan's identity was that of the 4th prince of the kingdom of Greycastle, Roland, and he had been sent here to govern this region. The residents of this border town had caught and seized the witch, immediately turning her over to the local guards to question. Questioning? No, she was immediately sent to be sentenced with no opportunity to defend herself. The execution of suspected witches was usually overseen by the local lords or bishops, But since he'd assumed control of this territory, issuing such orders had become his obligation. Cheng Yan's memory answered his questions one by one. It was unnecessary to filter and read through them, it was as if they had always been his own experiences. He was momentarily confused, there was absolutely no way a dream could have so many details. Then, Cheng Yan thought, was it possible that this wasn't a dream? I've really traveled through time, to the dark ages of medieval Europe, and have become Roland? I've gone from a pitiful mechanical engineer with his nose down in his papers to a grand fourth prince overnight? This piece of territory that looked so barren and backward was in the kingdom of Grey Castle, a name that he had never seen in his history books. Well, then how do I want to handle this? Cheng Yan thought to himself. Cheng Yan decided he would try and examine how an unscientific thing like being transported through time and space had happened later. His immediate concern was with how to stop the farce taking place in front of him. Assigning the blame for the disasters and misfortune that befell them onto these witches was the act of ignorant barbarians. He really couldn't bring himself to do anything as stupid as hanging another person just to satisfy the watching masses. He grabbed the formal written orders held by Brev and tossed them to the ground and slowly said, I'm feeling tired, we will give our judgment another day. Court dismissed, now disperse people. Cheng Yan knew he couldn't risk being reckless, so he rummaged carefully through his memories and reflected the former prince's behavior. He had to continue on with the former prince's dandyism and roguish behavior. That's right, the fourth prince himself was messed up, had a nasty character, and did whatever he wanted with no thoughts to the consequences of his actions. Anyways, Cheng Yan mused, could they really expect an uncontrollable 20-something-year-old to have good behavior? The members of the nobility who sat with him maintained their equanimity at his unexpected statement, but a tall man wearing a suit of armor stood up and argued, Your Highness, this isn't a joke. All known witches should be put to death immediately upon being identified, or other witches might be tempted to try and save her. Do you want to force the church to get involved when they hear that we have allowed a witch to live? We have no choice in this matter. Carter, this dashing man, was actually his knight commander. Cheng Yan frowned and said, Why? Are you scared? His voice was full of blatant mockery and wasn't a complete act. A man with an arm thicker than the waist of the so-called witch actually feared a prison raid from women. Were witches really the devil's messengers? Wouldn't it be better to catch more witches than to settle for only one? Seeing him no longer utter a word, Cheng Yan waved his hand to call his personal guards and left. Carter hesitated a moment before going down and catching up with the troops walking by the fourth prince's side. The other nobles got up and paid their respects to the prince, but Cheng Yan could see undisguised contempt from the eyes of those in the crowd. Back in the keep, the castle was located to the south of the border town. He dismissed the anxious Minister Brev outside the door to his chambers, allowing him to finally breathe a sigh of relief now that he was alone. As a person who'd spent 90% of his time dealing with people through a computer, facing everyone like he just had already surpassed his comfort zone. Cheng Yan found the location of his bedroom from his new memories, took a seat on his bed, and got a moment of real rest as he tried to suppress his violently beating heart. At the moment, the most important matter was to clarify the situation. Why was the prince, who couldn't stay in Wimbledon City, the capital of the kingdom, sent to this barren land? The unexpected answer he came up with left him stupefied. Roland Wimbledon was actually sent here to fight for the right to succeed the king. Everything had originated from King Wimbledon III of Grey Castle's wonderful proclamation to his children saying, You want to inherit the kingdom? The firstborn prince doesn't necessarily have the right to become king, only the person who proves themselves as the most capable of governing can inherit the country. He placed various territories under the rule of his 5 children, and after 5 years he'd decide who would become his successor based on the level of skill they displayed in governing their respective territories. While turning the decision of who should inherit the throne into a meritocracy and providing equal opportunity regardless of gender might sound like very enlightened concepts, the real problem was with the actual implementation of said ideas. Would there be any guarantee that all 5 of them received the same starting conditions? This wasn't like playing a real-time strategy game. To his knowledge, the second son had been given a better territory than this border town. Actually, when he thought about it, it seemed that among the 5 regions they'd been given, none of the others were worse than his frontier town. His starting point was simply inferior. Also, Qing Yan wondered, how was one to assess the level of governance? By the population? Military power? Economic standing? Wimbledon 3 hadn't mentioned any standard, nor did he put the slightest restrictions on their methods of competition. In case someone secretly assassinated the other candidates, what would he do? Would the queen stand by and watch her children kill each other? Wait. He carefully recalled the next memory. All right, another piece of bad news, the queen had died 5 years ago. Qing Yan sighed. Obviously, this was a barbaric and dark feudal era he had found himself in. Just the way they seemed to wantonly kill witches was enough to give him a few hints. Also, Qing Yan thought, why would he want to become king? With no internet and none of the comforts of modern civilization, he'd have to live the same life as the native people. Burning witches for fun, living in a city where everyone dumped their excrement wherever they wished, and finally dying from the Black Death. Qing Yan being a prince could already be considered a very high starting point. Even if he didn't become king, he was still of royal blood and had already been knighted. As long as he managed to stay alive, he would be considered as one of the lords of the realm. Qing Yan suppressed his wandering thoughts and went to his bedroom mirror. The man looking back at him in the mirror had light gray hair, which was the royal family's most distinctive feature. His face was slightly pale, and with his regular facial features, he seemed to be completely without personality traits. He appeared to be lacking in physical exercise, and as for wine and woman, he recalled indulging in both with some regularity. He had had several lovers in the king's city, but all had been willing participants. He hadn't forced anyone. As for the cause of his own crossing over, Qing Yan guessed that thanks to the company's inhuman urging to progress forward, his boss had arranged for him to work overtime, which in turn actually led to the tragedy that was his sudden death. The victims of cases like these were usually coders, mechanical engineers, and programmers. In the end, no matter what, at least I got the equivalent of an extra life. I really shouldn't complain too much. In the coming days, I might be able to slowly improve this life, but my first task is to play a convincing fourth prince, so that other people don't find something amiss with my behavior and think I'm possessed by the devil, leading to my being burned at the stake, Qing Yan thought to himself. So, in order to live well, Qing Yan took a deep breath, looked in the mirror, and whispered, "From now on, I'm Roland." Chapter 2, The Witch Named Anna, Part 1. For a period of time Roland locked himself in his room as he carefully reviewed the memories of this new world, such that dinner had to be sent directly to him by his servants. Roland suppressed his fear of the unfamiliar environment he found himself in under his strong will to live. He was very clear that if he wanted to blend in and avoid being suspected by the people around him, he needed to get more information as soon as possible. Roland had to say that the fourth prince had, apart from fooling around with some other sons of the nobility, no additional things in his brain. Over and over again, Roland was unable to remember any valuable information such as knowledge of the aristocracy, the political situation in his own country, or the diplomatic situation with his neighbors. As for basic common sense, such as city names, or the years of significant events, they were completely different than the history of Europe he knew. It seemed that based on his memories, the old Roland had had absolutely no chance of obtaining the throne. Perhaps the king of Grey Castle was aware of this, and because of that, the prince had been thrown into this hellish place. Even if he made a mess of things in this border town, it wouldn't result in much damage to the kingdom. The next memories Roland looked at were of his brothers and sisters, and what he found left him unsure whether he should laugh or cry. Roland's eldest brother, the first prince, had an above-average military power. His second brother was scheming and horribly treacherous. His third sister was afraid of death. and his younger sister was brilliant. This was the entirety of the former fourth prince's impressions of his siblings. Roland felt a little awkward. After more than a decade of living with them, the old Roland's knowledge had been summed up in a few words. What forces they developed, who their competent subordinates were, what they were experts at, what their plans were, and so on. He knew nothing at all. It was only 3 months ago that the fourth prince had come to this frontier town, but the nobility had already stopped hiding their contempt for him. It was obvious that the fourth prince wasn't cut out to be a leader. Fortunately, when the king had left Roland this territory, he had sent along 2 of his more capable subordinates to provide assistance so the townspeople wouldn't suffer under the old Roland's inept rule. After Roland woke up the next morning, one of his maids, Tyre, repeatedly mentioned that the assistant minister wanted to see him. When it seemed that he could put it off no longer, Roland acted according to his past memories and reached out to cup the maid's ass before sending her to fetch Brav, who had been waiting in the drawing room. Seeing the flushing Tyre exit the room, Roland suddenly realized that, since he had reincarnated, shouldn't he have a system or something like that? At least in many tales that was the standard formula, but the arrival of a system never happened. Sure enough, what Roland had read in those novels was all fiction. In the drawing room, Brav was already restless from waiting. The moment Roland appeared, he asked, "Your Highness, why didn't you order the execution yesterday? 1 day earlier, 1 day later, what's the difference?" Roland said as he clapped his hands, letting the attendants know to bring his breakfast in. "Sit down, Brav." The impressions he had from the old Roland's memories, and also based on his own opinion, was that the knight commander liked to confront problems with the fourth prince directly face to face, even in the presence of others, while the assistant minister was more circumspect and liked to discuss issues in private. In any case, the loyalty of the 2 was likely to be to the king. A day later may lead to other witches appearing, my royal prince. This isn't the same as before with your previous escapades, not during this time of chaos. Brav cautioned. How can you even say that? Roland asked while frowning. I thought you were capable of distinguishing the differences between superstition and fact. Brav looked bewildered. What superstitions? That a witch is evil and the devil's messenger, Roland seemed to not mind as he patiently answered the question. Isn't that what the church teaches us? They won't intervene here. I think it's actually the opposite. Their propaganda states that witches are evil, and while we've chosen not to actively aid their witch hunt, all the people in this territory believe in these shameless superstitions spread by the church. Brav was shocked. Could a witch really be indeed evil? Roland asked, like what? The assistant minister was silent for a moment, trying to decide if the prince was deliberately making fun of him. Your Highness, this problem can be discussed later. I know you don't like the church, but this pursuit of conflict is counterproductive. Roland curled his lips. It seemed that reversing this superstition about witches wasn't something that he could do overnight, but for now he decided to put it out of his mind. When Roland's breakfast of toast, fried eggs and a carafe of milk arrived, he made up 2 plates, one of which he served to the assistant minister. You haven't eaten until now, right? Asked Roland before he started eating. The maid had told him that Brav had arrived outside his chambers at dawn, and had directly requested to see him, so he shouldn't have had time to eat. While he'd decided to imitate the former prince's way of life, he'd also decided to begin to change the way people perceived him a bit at a time. The assistant minister was a good first target for his plan. Roland thought to himself, if you can make your men feel valued, then they'll be more motivated to work for you. Taking the initiative had always been the most efficient way to win, hadn't it? Brav took the cup of milk Roland handed him but didn't drink as he anxiously said, Your Highness, we still have a problem. The guards reported that 3 days ago a suspected witch camp was found in the western forest. Because they left in a hurry and didn't clean up all of their traces, a guard found this in the camp. He took out a coin from his pocket and put it in front of Roland. This wasn't the common currency of the kingdom, at least according to the memories of the old Roland. He hadn't seen such a coin. It wasn't even like theirs, it wasn't even made of metal. Feeling it in his hands, he was surprised to find that the coin was warm, and the assistant minister definitely wasn't the source of the sweltering heat of at least 40 degrees Celsius, which reminded him of the moment when one took a bath. "What is this?" Roland asked. "I thought it was just some foul trinket that a witch made, but it's actually more serious than that." Prv had to pause to wipe his forehead. The printed pattern is known as the Devil's Eye of the Sacred Mountain, which is the emblem of the Witch Cooperation Association. Roland rubbed the coin's uneven surface. He guessed that it was probably fired ceramic. Indeed, he saw that the center of the coin depicted a mountain-shaped pattern of 3 triangles juxtaposed with one eye in the center triangle. The pattern's contour lines were very rough. He judged that it should have been polished by hand. Roland recalled the 2 terms Devil's Eye of the Sacred Mountain and the Witch Cooperation Association, but wasn't able to discover any details. It seemed that the 4th prince had no interest in occultism. Roland didn't expect that Prv knew more, but he continued, "Your Highness, you haven't seen real witches before, so it's understandable if you think their abilities are exaggerated. Indeed, they can be injured, they'll even bleed and aren't any harder to kill than the rest of us, but that's only for a witch who can't resist. When they receive the devil's power, it can shorten the lifespan of a witch, but it can also give them terrible power. Ordinary people just can't match them. Once a witch grows to adulthood, even an army will have to pay a high price to kill her. Their desires are almost impossible to suppress, ultimately causing them to degenerate into the devil's minions. The church therefore declared a holy inquisition. If a woman is found to have even a chance to be a witch, they're to be immediately seized and executed. The king has also approved of this decree, and in fact, these measures have been highly effective, and the incidents where witches have wreaked havoc have already greatly declined in comparison to 100 years ago. The Sacred Mountain, or to say the doorway to hell, is only a rumor illustrated in an ancient book from that era. Roland, while gnawing on his bread, sneered again and again as he heard this. Although the histories of this world and the world he knew were very different, their historical trajectories were surprisingly similar. No matter if it was the church in this world or the church he knew from his, he thought that religion itself was the devil's minion, the real source of evil. You don't think sentencing someone to death only because they are different is evil? Using God's name to kill someone was all kinds of wrong. Unaware of Roland's thoughts, Prv continued with his speech. Recorded in ancient books is that witches can only find real peace at the Sacred Mountain. They wouldn't have to suffer uncontrollable desires because their magic would have no side effects. There's no doubt that the so-called Sacred Mountain was certainly the birthplace of evil, an entrance to hell on earth. I think that only hell won't punish those who've fallen for the devil's temptations. The League of Allied Witches, who are they? What's their relationship with the Sacred Mountain? Roland asked. Prv explained with a sour face, in the past, everything was good because the witches would run away before the Inquisition arrived and were living in seclusion. But in recent years, the League of Allied Witches appeared and made a difference. They want to gather all of the witches and find the Sacred Mountain. For this purpose, the Witch Cooperation Association will even take the initiative of luring others into becoming a witch. In the last year, many babies disappeared in the port of Clearwater, and the rumor was that it was their doing. Chapter 3 The Witch Named Anna, Part 2. Roland swallowed the last piece of fried egg from his breakfast, took a napkin and wiped his mouth before saying, "So you're saying that you are worried that the Witch Cooperation Association will hear the news that the witch did not die and hence will try to rescue her?" "It is as your highness has said," Prv stomped angrily as he exclaimed, "if the prisoner had died it would be bad enough, but now she is still alive. If those witches are even crazy enough to steal babies on the chance they might become future comrades, how far do you think they'd go for someone who has already become a minion of the devil? With how recklessly they behave, attempting a rescue wouldn't be surprising." Roland was confused. He had always felt that there was something amiss about this situation. Why were the assistant minister and the knight commander so scared of witches? The woman who should have been hanged was a witch, right? The woman who was so thin it was as if she would fall down when the wind blew. If she really had such a terrible power, why would she need to stand there and wait for death? No, she would not. According to the preaching of the church, she was the devil incarnate, to be executed without trial. Even the army would need to pay a hefty price when going against a witch. However, this devil was caught by the normal townspeople of this border town, was tortured, even fitted with a noose, but until now they had not seen a trace of that supposed terrible power. How did she get caught? Roland queried. I heard that when the North Mine collapsed, in order to escape, she exposed her identity as a witch and was then captured by angry villagers. Breve answered. Roland thought as he listened to Breve, why do I have the impression that this happened the day before my reincarnation? How did she expose herself? The prince asked aloud. Well, I am not sure, the assistant minister shook his head and said, the situation was very confusing, it could be that someone saw her using witchcraft. Roland frowned as he asked, you did not thoroughly investigate the situation? Your Highness, to resume mining was the priority, the assistant minister protested, the revenue from that iron mine accounts for half of the production of this town, and the guards confirmed that someone at the scene was killed by witchcraft. What kind of witchcraft? Roland asked, interested. The head and a large part of the body were spread out on the ground as if they were melted. The corpse looked like a used-up candle, the minister said with a look of disgust. Your Highness, be glad you didn't see such a scene. Roland started playing with a silver fork thoughtfully. Historically, most of the victims of the Inquisition witch hunt were innocent, tools for the church to maintain control over the populace or possibilities for ignorant townspeople to vent their anger. Sure, a small part of the accused caused their own downfall. The kind of people dressed that oddly while mixing together all sorts of strange material, claiming that they could predict the future and knew the conclusion of life and death. The truth was those people did figure out some tricks, such as the use of chemical reactions, but then they used that to claim that they had gained the power of the gods. To modern eyes, these were just some simple chemistry tricks, but in medieval times, those could easily be misrepresented as incredible phenomenon. As for melting people, the first thing Roland thought of was an acid solution. But it would be a hassle to prepare those kinds of things, and you would also need to thoroughly soak the body with it, but it wouldn't look like a burned down candle. As for other methods, they were out of the question. Then how did she do it? If she relied on alchemy, and that was rare, maybe. Roland thought until there and then said in a determined tone, take me to see her. The assistant minister was shocked for a moment before spluttering, Sir, you want to see the witch? Breve stood up in panic, knocked over the cup with the milk which he hadn't drunk. Yes, this is a command. Roland said, looked back and smiled at the assistant minister. He was now really thankful for the fourth prince's unreasonable style. Roland went over to the door but suddenly paused, asking, right, I have to ask, why would we use the gallows? What? Breve said. Roland reiterated his question, why would she be hanged? Shouldn't witches be burned at the stake? Breve's face seemed puzzled as he asked, isn't it true? But she is not afraid of fire. The dungeon was small, this barren land could not afford to have too many prisoners. Most criminals would face trial after a few days and either be released or killed. In addition to Breve, the prince was entering the dungeon with the knight commander, the prison warden, and 2 guards. The dungeon had a total of 4 levels and the walls were built out of hard granite blocks. It was Roland's first time being at this kind of place and he noted the deeper he got, the narrower the hallway became. The number of cells was also reduced. He thought they dug a pit in the form of an inverted cone first, and then build layer after layer out of stone. This rough project would of course not have a good drainage system. The ground was wet and the muddy sewage was flowing down the stairs, down to the last floor. Obviously, the witch was at the bottom of the dungeon. Each layer they went down, the stench in the air became thicker. Your Highness, you are risking too much by doing this, Even though she is sealed with God's locket of retribution, it isn't safe. It was Carter who had spoken. As soon as he knew that the prince was planning on visiting the witch, he immediately went after the prince, advising him all along the road to stop going over. But it was all for naught. Even the repeating the direct command of the king not to engage in any dangerous situations had no effect. Obviously, he wasn't only a pretty face, he was also a chatterbox. After being subjected to this for some time, Roland only wished that someone would sew his mouth up. You must look evil in the eye before you face it on the battlefield and stand toe to toe. I thought you knew that, he said. In addition to fighting the evil with courage, it is also important to assess one's capabilities and act accordingly. Reckless behavior is not considered courageous. Carter rebutted. You mean to say that if you ran into an enemy weaker than you hold justice, but if he is stronger than you will turn a blind eye? Roland challenged. No, Your Highness, I mean. Carter stammered. Before you were already afraid of a witch raid, and now you are even afraid to see a little girl. My knight commander is indeed fearsome. Although the knight was a good speaker, he didn't excel at debate. Encountering a smooth talker like Roland, he completely lost. Taking advantage of this effort, the group reached the bottom of the dungeon. This floor was many times smaller than the one above, with a total of only 2 cells. The warden lit the torches on the walls, and as the darkness faded, Roland saw the hunched-over witch in a corner of her cell. It was already late autumn and the temperature in the dungeon was low enough to make people see white fog when they took a breath. He wore a fur coat with silk lining inside, so did not feel cold, but the girl only wore coarse linen that couldn't even fully cover her body, with her arms and feet sticking out and turning blue. The suddenly lit up torches made her cringe away with her eyes closed. But soon, she was able to open her eyes and looked straight at them. It was a pair of pale blue eyes, like a calm lake before the onset of heavy rains. There was no fear on the witch's face, and you couldn't see any anger or hatred. Roland saw a vision. It was as if what he saw in front of him was not a weak little girl. Instead, it appeared as if he was in front of a raging flame. He suddenly felt that the torchlight from the walls was a little dim. The girl tried to stand up while leaning against the wall, in slow motion as if afraid to fall. But in the end, she ultimately stood up and hobbled her way out of the corner, allowing the light to cover her. Already such a simple movement, yet it made his men suck in several breaths of cold air as they even retreated 2 steps back. Only the knight commander could resist and stood in front of Roland. What is your name? Roland asked the witch and patted the knight on the shoulder, indicating that he did not need to be so nervous. Anna, she replied. Chapter 4 Flame. In the end, what happened when the mine collapsed? Can you repeat it for me step by step? Roland asked. Anna nodded and began to describe it. Roland was a bit surprised. He expected her to stay silent or to angrily curse at him, but instead she just responded with, "Ask whatever you want," and obediently told her tale. It wasn't a complicated story, but a sad one nonetheless. Anna's father was a miner, and when the mine collapsed, he was at work. Immediately after they got the news of the collapse, Anna and the other miners' families went over to help rescue their loved ones. The North Mine was previously rumored to be an underground monster lair with many forks in the road, extending in all directions. Since the rescuers were under no unified command, the volunteers separated after arriving at the mine entry, so that when Anna found her father, only her neighbors, Susan and Ansgar, were by her side. Anna had discovered that her father's leg was crushed under a full ore cart and he couldn't move, but at his side was another miner patting him down, searching for her father's money. As the looter saw them arrive, he took a pick and rushed at Ansgar and knocked him to the ground, but just at the moment when he was about to strike her, Anna killed him first. Anna's neighbors vowed that they would never say anything about this matter, and with their help Anna rescued her father. But before dawn, the next day, Anna's father went out on his crutches and reported to the patrolling guards that his daughter was a witch. Why? Roland, when he had heard up until this point, could not help but ask. Silent answered, probably so he could receive the gold reward. The discovery and reporting of a witch can get you 25 gold royals. For a man with a crippled leg, these 25 gold royals are equivalent to what he could earn for half a lifetime of work. After a moment of silence, Roland asked, "Your opponent was a strong and grown-up man, how were you able to kill him?" At this Anna laughed, and the flames of the torches shook, just like high waves on a previously calm lake's surface. "It was exactly like what you think, I used the power of the devil," Anna said. "Shut up, vile sorceress!" shouted the warden, but everyone could hear his voice trembling. "Is that true? I want to see it." The fourth prince was unmoved by their antics as he calmly said, "Your Highness, this is no laughing matter." The knight commander interjected as he furrowed his brows. Roland stepped out from behind the protection of his knight, step by step moving closer towards the cell as he said, "Everyone who is too afraid of her can leave, I did not ask you to stay here. Don't panic, she has a god's locket of retribution around her neck," shouted Brav loudly to comfort everyone, but likely also to reassure himself, no matter how powerful the devil is, he cannot break God's blessing. Standing in front of the prison bars, Roland and Anna were at arm's length and he could clearly see her dusty and bruised cheek. Her soft facial features shows that she still was a minor, but her expression did not have any traces of childishness. More than that, even anger was hard to find. It was the kind of disharmonious thing Roland had seen on TV. It was the face of a wandering orphan who had suffered from poverty, hunger, cold, etc. But it was not exactly the same. Normally in front of the camera the lost children always stood with a bent and beaten down body, their head down, but Anna did not. From the beginning until now, she had still tried to stand straight with her gaze slightly raised, calmly looking into the prince's eyes. She did not fear death, Roland realized. Instead, she was waiting for death. "Is this the first time you have seen a witch, my lord? Your curiosity might get you killed," Anna said. "If it was really the power of the devil, you would absolutely not be in this current situation," Roland responded. "If that were true, it is not I should be fear death, but your father." The fires in the prison suddenly became dark, and this was definitely not an illusion. What seemed to be like suppressed flames were soon left with only tight flame clusters. Behind himself, Roland could hear the sound of rapid breathing and prayer, as well as the muffled sound of panicked people accidentally falling down. Roland's heartbeat accelerated and he felt himself at an unusual turning point. On one side was the world with common sense, which was in accordance with the laws and constants that he knew, not one thread loose, and on the other side was an incredible new world, which was full of mystery and the unknown. And right now he was standing in front of this world. Hung on her neck is actually the god's locket of retribution? What a simple and crude locket, Roland thought. A red iron chain with a sparkling and translucent pendant. If the witch did not have both her hands handcuffed behind her back, couldn't she use a quick pull to destroy this kind of thing? Roland glanced at the crowd behind him, who were still mouthing prayers in panic. He quickly reached into the cell, grabbed the pendant, and with a little tug the necklace's chain snapped and then crashed down broken. The move startled even Anna. "Come on," Roland whispered. "Are you in the end a liar, some type of alchemist, or are you a real witch? If you now take out bottles and jars and start compounding acids, I will be disappointed," Roland thought. Roland then heard a crackling sound, which was the noise of the thermal expansion of water vapor. Thanks to a dramatic rise in temperature, the water on the ground beneath them had changed to steam. Roland saw a blazing flame rising directly from Anna's foot, and then the ground where she stood was burning up. The torches behind them exploded simultaneously, as if they received pure oxygen, in a burst of brilliant light. For a short time, the whole cell was as if it was in daylight, and all this was accompanied by the onlookers' terrified screams. When the witch moved forward, the flames surrounding her moved with her. As she came to the edge of her cell, The dozens of iron bars that made up the wall became pillars of fire. Roland was forced to retreat. The heated air was biting his skin, making him feel pain. In just a few breaths of time, he had escaped from a late autumn summer. No, this was a different kind of heat. This was solely generated by this high temperature flame and not a full ambient summer heat. One side of his body was facing the flame's heat, and on the opposite side Roland felt a chill. He could even feel cold sweat trickling down his back. She really does not fear fire, Roland thought. Roland remembered the words of the assistant minister. Only now could he really understand the meaning of that sentence. She is the flame herself, and how could someone fear oneself? Soon, the iron bars turned from crimson to a light yellow, and they began to melt. This meant that they have been heated to more than 1500 degrees Celsius, and achieving this in a condition without any insulating measures, which was far beyond the imagination of Roland. Like others, he had stepped away from the cell, firmly attaching himself to the wall farthest away from the cell. If he had not done this, the heat the molten iron produced was enough to kill him even without direct contact, but it was also enough to close to combust, such as Anna's. Her prisoner's smock had burned to ashes and her body was now surrounded by a raging fire. Roland didn't know how long it lasted, but in the end, the flame completely faded. The torches were quietly burning on the section of the wall next to them. It seemed like nothing had ever happened. But Anna's burned clothes, the hot air, and the prison bars which looked like as if it was burned by the devil's minions, all this, told everyone that this wasn't an illusion. In addition to Roland, only the night commander was still standing. The others had collapsed to the ground. The warden was so scared that his pants smelled of urine. Anna was now standing naked outside the cell, her arm shackles were gone. She did not block the view at her naked body, her hands were hanging naturally at her side and her eyes, which were blue like the sea, were restored to the tranquility from before. "Now I have satisfied your curiosity, sir," she said. "Will you kill me now?" "No." Roland stepped forward and wrapped his coat around her and said with a tone as mild as possible, "Miss Anna, I want to hire you." Chapter 5 Reasons. Second law of thermodynamics: heat can never pass from a colder to a warmer body without some other changes, or it is impossible to convert heat from a single source into useful work without causing other effects. In an irreversible or spontaneous change from one equilibrium state to another, the entropy always increases. Roland carefully copied this law onto paper, writing in the language of this world. At first glance, the text resembled a moving earthworm. He really did not understand how the locals could learn so many varied and complicated characters. If you asked him which of the numerous physical laws would be the one to cause most people to feel depressed, Roland would choose the second law of thermodynamics. It tells everyone that this world's heat will always pass from high to low, replacing the disorder into order, increasing the entropy. Eventually, everything will end in nothingness and the universe will become deathly silent. And this world had broken away from the ever-increasing entropy problem. It could make magic out of nothing, which was much more impressive than the theorized invention of a perpetual motion machine. The forces of evil. Roland scoffed and thought to himself that the people of this world did not understand the true nature of this power, and it was so enormous that it could even change the entire universe. Of course, for a beginning, he could only start to change this small border town. Roland hummed a tune, tore up the paper he had written and threw it into the fireplace where it was reduced to ashes, feeling the pleasure of breaking out of a cage. The assistant minister looked askance at the fourth prince's unexplainable actions, but fortunately for Roland, the old fourth prince had always acted in this manner. In the end, Briv decided that the prince's strange whimsy would pass with no need for him to bother about it, and he could see that the prince was enjoying himself. "The killing has been completed, the witch was hanged at noon," reported Briv to Roland. "Good, did anyone see it?" Roland spoke while writing. "No matter, all of the condemned wear hoods." In order to prevent the Holy Church and the Witch Cooperation Association from knocking at his door, Roland had ordered the dungeon warden to find a woman with a similar build and let her replace Anna on the gallows. In addition to the knight commander and assistant minister, everyone who was with him in the dungeon hush money consisting of 20 gold royals. This was an enormous windfall for them. Brev even proposed killing all of the witnesses, or they would never keep their silence forever, but Roland rejected this. He knew he could not prevent this secret from spreading, but this didn't matter because he actually wanted someone to spread the word, just not now. He would fall out with the church sooner or later anyway, those idiots who promoted the intolerance that caused such a waste of resources. On the other hand, other witches would hear there was a border town in the kingdom where they could live a free life, and could even get preferential treatment. What would these witches think? No matter what age and time it was, the talent one possessed was the most important thing. Then everything is alright, Roland said. Next point, for the tariffs, taxes and expenditures of the year, you previously gave me a short summary, let me have a proper look at them. Furthermore, those workshops in the city, the places that make ironware, textiles, pottery and such, you also have to include the numbers and sizes. I'll need 3 days to prepare these records, but... Brev said as he first nodded, then paused and looked like he wasn't sure how to continue. What is the matter? Roland asked. He was aware that finally, the moment had come where his ability was about to be tested. Yesterday everything he had done was questioned by the assistant minister because of his doubt in Roland. A scoundrel would always be a scoundrel, but having a bad character didn't mean that they were also brainless. To aid and harbor a witch, in the eyes of the assistant minister, was akin to declaring war on the world. Your Highness, I do not understand. Brev paused as he wrestled with his words. In the past, although you made trouble, it was always more harmless, but now, taking such a significant risk only to save a witch? The law to hunt them down was proclaimed by the church, and even your father, His Majesty Wimbledon III supports it. Roland thought for a moment and then asked, do you believe that this border town is a good place to live? This. Brev did not understand what this question had to do with the problem. After some time he gave his true opinion. No. It is awful, compared to Valencia, the city of golden harvests or the port of Clearwater. What do you feel my chances are of winning the rights to the throne against my siblings? The assistant minister opened his mouth but didn't answer. Almost 0. So I can only choose to walk another path, Roland continued as he watched expressionlessly as Brev took one step after another into the trap he laid down. The kind of road that would even impress my father. He did not state the point that the witches were not inherently evil because to do so would have little success. Brev had been the assistant minister of finance for 20 years and was regarded as a competent politician. For politicians, their personal gains were usually more important than the moral law of good and evil. Also taking the emotional route was not suitable for him. As Roland recalled the previous prince's actions, he found out that he really couldn't be considered as an upright and righteous person. So he chose to play on the eternal conflict between religious and secular authority, as the expanding power of the Holy Church was a constant thorn in the side of Wimbledon III. The Church claimed that the world worked in accordance with the will of God, and the Pope was the voice of God. If the people found what he said weren't the truth, even full of lies, the dominance of the Holy Church it would be greatly shaken. With the phrase, the witch is not evil, so I want to save her, it would be hard to convince the assistant minister, but replaced with she is not an evil witch, and I can use this to attack the church, Brev could easily be persuaded to accept this conclusion. Regardless how the territories of my brothers and sisters flourished, it was a foregone conclusion that everything would end in the possession of the church. They had already stepped on the divine right of kings. If only the Pope can be considered as rightful ruler, then are they the actual rulers of this land or are we? Roland paused for just the right amount of time before going on. Even my father will have to place his hope in me, a leader who isn't suppressed by the Holy Church, one who holds all the exclusive rights of a royal king. His choice would be very clear. Changing the enemy of the entire world into only the enemy of the church was easier to accept for many people, not to mention Brev, who was himself standing on the side of the royal family. In the same way, If he is aware of the extraordinary abilities they have, that they can pry open grip of the Holy Church, the execution orders will be nothing more than a paper joke. While there is no possibility to guarantee success, it's not impossible either. Do you think I'm worth the risk? Roland stared at the assistant minister while saying these sentences in a row. Do not falter now, bruv. You've been an assistant minister for 20 years, right? If I can become Wimbledon 4, the word assistant will be removed, or even further, something like becoming the hand of the king is possible. Looking at Bruv's back who was leaving, Roland felt relieved. It was easy to see that he didn't think much of his promise. This was normal. Even Roland himself did not believe that this just recently scraped together plan, which was made up out of hubris, could be realized. But that was not important. The key was to let Bruv believe that he really thought that way. A sheltered noble's son could only think of a simple plan, not to mention that the fourth prince really hated the mentality of the church. At this time, the way to attract more witches was also paved. As for his real thoughts, even if Bruv knew them, he wouldn't be able to understand them. Roland summoned the maid. Call Miss Anna and tell her she should come to see me. Roland happily thought that the following business would be the best. TN, if you're interested into the second law of thermodynamics, Chapter 6 Training, Part 1, in the rear castle gardens stood a single cottage, surrounded by a wooden fence. The cottage was built out of clay bricks and the ground was filled with loess, a mixture of sand, silt and clay. There was also a pond in front of the cottage with a circumference of roughly 9.5 yards and with a pond filled with an appropriate amount of river water. This environment was not only difficult to burn but also had a certain manufactured feel. It seemed to be taken right out of a dream. Piled atop the ground were several iron ingots. These came from the blacksmith and were placed there by Carter. The pond was very charming. Roland had immediately taken a fancy to this place, but as for a laboratory, this place was still too crude. Roland shook his head, realizing that using some random materials and having them build a perfect lab was not possible. If he could find a suitable place in the future and collected all the resources, he would get Bruv to start making him a workshop. Calling Anna over, who had been resting in the cottage, Roland asked, "How are you? Did you sleep well?" Looking at the bewildered Anna who emerged, Roland smiled. The witch Roland saw now and the witch he saw yesterday looked like two completely different people. After a thorough cleaning, her long flaxen hair draped over her shoulders like a shawl and had a soft and shiny luster. Although her skin hadn't been maintained due to her rough life as a commoner, her youth made up for it, and the light dusting of freckles which were on the bridge of her nose added a youthful vitality to her face. Her body was still thin and looked as if a strong breeze could push her down, but her cheeks with a rosy color and the bruises and marks on her neck were much faded from yesterday. Roland suspected that witches received an improvement of their physical capabilities in addition to their magic. At least Anna's recovery rate had to be much faster than the average person's. Originally, since you experienced so many terrible things, you should be allowed to rest a few days. However, our need at this time is very urgent, so I'll compensate you later, Roland said before telling the girl to turn around in a circle. This dress, does it fit well? Anna now wore clothes he had carefully selected from a variety of styles, all in order to satisfy his lewd tastes. The full protective clothing that the iron workers wore was too thick and not suitable for her, while the robes many mages wore in games appeared to be elegant and classy. In real life they restricted the mobility of the wearer and would quickly be turned to ashes. As for maid dresses, hey, is there any better clothing than this? Even if this world had no modern maid outfits yet, it was not a big problem. The usual maid clothes were what the later generations were based on after all. So Roland directly took a set of clothes from Tyre and cut it to Anna's size, shortened the skirt, changed the long sleeves to short sleeves, made the round neck collar become folded and then tied it into a bow, thereby creating the new witch uniforms. This was matched with a witch hat, customized, black boots, ready, as well as a knee-length cape, ordered. In the past, Roland could only see this type of costume in a movie, But right now, one stood in front of him, looking so much like a witch from Earth lore. "Your Highness, you. What do I need to do for you?" Anna asked. Anna really could not keep up with the ideas of the great man in front of her. She felt that she was losing her ability to judge the situation. Being dragged out of the dungeon with a bag over her head, she believed she would soon be liberated of her cursed life. But after taking off the headgear, Anna found herself not seeing the gallows or the guillotine, but a magnificent room. Then a bunch of people flooded in, undressing and bathing her. From her armpits to toes, nothing was left unpolished. Next, it was the dressing room. Anna did not expect that she would have needed all these dresses to serve someone. She also never knew that clothes could actually be so comfortable. As they laid gently on her body, it was possible to feel the slightest friction. Finally, a white-bearded old man had entered the room, and after he ordered everyone else to step out, he had placed a contract in front of her. At this moment Anna realized, the man who had said he wanted to hire her in the dungeon was actually this kingdom's fourth prince. When he said he wanted to employ her, it was not a joke. The contract clearly stated that if she worked for the prince, she would be paid a gold royal every month. Of course, Anna knew what receiving a gold royal a month meant. Her father, who had worked in the mine all day, had had his pay determined by the amount of ore he was able to mine, but the best haul he ever had was only worth 1 silver royal. 100 silver royals could be converted to a gold royal, and even this depended on the purity of the silver royals. So, was her job to accompany the prince while sleeping? When she was bathing, Anna had heard the maids whispering, but she didn't think she was worth this price. With her blood tainted by the devil, she was a person full of filthiness. After she was exposed, everyone knew her real identity. Even if the prince's curiosity was compelling to this extent, even if he did not fear the devil, he did not need to pay her any remuneration at all. That night, however, no one came, and she fell asleep peacefully. It was the softest bed Anna had ever slept in, so she just lay down and immediately fell asleep. The next day when she opened her eyes it was already noon. Lunch had already been served in her room, delivering war bread with cheese and meats. Before, she had obviously been ready to die. She had even decided to willingly give up her life to atone for her sins. Those were her original thoughts, but after tasting the luxurious meal, Anna could not help it, tears started running down. Sauces and seasonings were mixed within her mouth, a strong hint of a spicy flavor mingled with a sweet taste, attacking, again and again, her taste buds. Suddenly, she felt that the world was a little bit brighter. Anna felt that if she could eat this food every day, then even if demons attacked her body, she would have more courage to resist, right? Now standing in this garden which resembled an old temple, nothing like her prison cell, Anna secretly made up her mind. Since the other party needed her, so whether it was to wear strange clothes, or even using the incredible devil's power, she was willing to try. So she repeated her question, but this time, she did not hesitate. "Your Highness, what do you need me for?" "Right now, I want you to learn to control your own strength, try it over and over until you can send out your flames and receive them back freely." "You mean the devil's?" No, Miss Anna," Roland interrupted her, "this is your power." The witch blinked with her eyes, her beautiful, big blue eyes. Most people in the world have the misconception that the powers of the witches belong to the devil, that they are incredibly evil, when, in fact, they are wrong. Roland bent his body down and met her eyes with his own on an equal level. "But you already figured that out, right?" Roland remembered Anna's chuckle in the dungeon. Would a person who felt they were evil have laughed with such self-mockery? "I did not use my power to hurt anyone else," she murmured, "except for that looter. Self-defense is not a sin, you did the right thing. People fear you because they do not understand you, they only know that with training witches can become strong fighters, but they do not know how to become a witch. Unknown power is always scary." "You're not afraid," Anna said. "Because I know your power belongs to you," Roland laughed. But if that looter had such an incredible strength, I wouldn't calmly stand in front of him. Well, let's get started, he said. Chapter 7 Training, Part 2. The fire rose up from under her feet but soon faded away. This was already her 23rd attempt. And she had failed again. On Anna's forehead beads of sweat constantly arose, but she just used the back of her hand to swipe them away, and the crackling sound of rising flames immediately sounded out again. With no stops to rest, the end of an exercise was followed by the start of the next one. The witch uniform lied at the side, neatly folded. If Anna had not insisted on doing so, her new uniform would have already been burned to ashes. Fortunately, with Roland's identity as the fourth prince, getting a few spare robes for her to use was not difficult. He had his maid Tyre deliver a whole bucket of robes, gathered by the maids for Anna to use. The 24th practice had finally been effective. The flame was no longer rising from her feet. Instead, it appeared on her hand. She gingerly moved her arm, to try and have the flame go to her fingertips, but the flame suddenly shook twice and rose up her arm, setting her sleeve on fire, even spreading from the sleeve to engulf the whole robe. Anna dismissed the flame, but her robe was already completely burned, so she turned to the bucket and got a new one. This wasn't the first time this had happened, but whenever it did, Roland would look away, so that his eyes were staring at other places, even if Anna herself didn't care about it. As a matter of fact, if it weren't for Roland's strong objections, she would probably have taken off all her clothes and practiced in the nude, in broad daylight. But even if Roland were to get a good view of her great figure that way, he wouldn't be able to calmly work with a naked girl, especially when the girl turned into flames and her body gave off an entirely different kind of charm. Roland shook his head, leaving his dirty thoughts behind. For the moment, it seemed that it was not easy to master the power of magic. The actual goal he had set for Anna was that she should control the flame to such a degree that she could release her flames from her palm or her fingers without destroying her own clothes. However, he also wanted the flames to have a high enough temperature to melt the iron ingots that were in the yard. After Anna's 30th attempt had failed, but before she could make the next one, Roland stopped her and told her to take a break. Anna looked at him in a startled fashion, but she gave no other response. Roland had to walk over. He even had to pull the girl by her hand, leading her to the chair and forcing her to sit down. "You are tired. When you are tired, you should rest. Do not be too impatient, we still have some time." He helped her wipe the sweat off of her moist forehead and said, "Let us consume an early afternoon tea." Roland knew that the nobility of the Kingdom of Grey Castle did not have the habit of drinking afternoon tea, and this world's productivity was so poor. For ordinary people it was hard to have the opportunity to taste such delicate food. The people in this world were not familiar with 3 meals a day, not to mention a 4th meal. As for the noble sons, they generally gathered together around this time to have some fun in bars or casinos. The prince himself had to temporarily take over for the maid and cook if he wanted to create the custom here, since they weren't familiar with it. Since he had to prepare some light refreshments and they didn't have any tea, he was forced to substitute ale. It would be important to get some tea in the future. So in the castle's rear gardens, in a wooden cottage, the first afternoon tea party of the Grey Castle Kingdom was held. Anna looked at the dishes of exquisite snacks, not believing her eyes. Since when could something to eat look so good? Although she did not know the specific name of the cake she ate, it was pure white in appearance, and the bright red collection of fruit could make people feel their appetite increasing. Especially seeing the edges of the pastry decorated in an exquisite pattern, all of this forced her to change her worldview once again. Roland proudly observed Anna's bewildered expression. She looked like a country bumpkin, but also slightly frightened. Although the strawberries on the cream cake were marinated in sugar and didn't even taste fresh, there was nothing left of the cake. Roland found that appreciating the witch's face while she ate was more satisfying than doing so himself. Roland watched Hannah, who was carefully placing the cake into her mouth, her blue eyes almost releasing a ray of light, and her hair gently swaying in the wind. Seeing all this, his heart suddenly nearly burst, and he thought to himself, "It's not good to cook anything worse." Well, the cultivation of feelings as well as talent was also very important. Watching Anna while she practiced and accompanying her to enjoy the afternoon tea became Roland's daily life, not showing any interest in the government affairs. Briv helped him to take care so that everything was clear and orderly. 3 days later, Briv delivered the information of the border town's industry that he had asked for to Roland's office. This was an absolutely unbelievable moment. The former fourth prince actually had never the patience to see such a big pile of complicated reports. As a matter of fact, even now he didn't have it. Roland needed only to read 2 lines of text until he started to feel dizzy, and he directly said to Briv, "You will read it to me." He spent an hour listening to Briv until he found a mistake. Why were the border town's annual winter taxes and trade revenues 0? Since the winter temperatures were low, the decline in the harvest could be understood, but what was the meaning of directly returning to 0? Had the local people the habit of hibernation? Briv coughed. "Sir, did you forget? In the winter months it's the time of the months of the demons, the town has no ability to guard its borders, all the residents must evacuate to Longzong's stronghold. But rest assured, your safety is certainly the first priority." Months of the demons? Roland seemed to recall having heard that phrase before. He didn't take of ghosts and the legends of wicked witches seriously, he considered it as part of this uncivilized world's nonsense. But now it seems that the monsters are not a fantasy since the witches actually do exist. Then, what about the other famous legends like ghosts? When he got his education as a noble, his history tutor had explained the month of the demons in detail. Every winter, after the first snow fell and the sun had gone behind the mountains, an intense darkness without light would descend. At that moment the gates of hell would open. The evil spirits from hell would corrupt living creatures, and turn them into the slaves of the devil. Some of the animals would change into powerful demon beasts with only one goal, to attack humans. Most witches were born in this season, and their power would be far stronger than usual because of it. "Have you seen them?" "The gates of hell," Roland asked. "Your Highness, how can ordinary people go see them?" Briv shook his head again and again. "Don't say nonsense, the mountains they come from cannot be conquered, even being close to the mountains you will be affected by the foul miasma, first getting a mild headache, and then in severe cases even losing your mind. Unless... Unless what? Unless the person doing it is a witch. Only a witch can go and see the gates of hell because they have fallen from grace and became the devil's minions. Naturally they don't need to fear the touch of evil." Mentioning witches, Briv glanced in the direction of the garden. "The demonic monsters, have you ever seen one?" Roland knocked on the table to recapture the assistant minister's attention. "Well, I haven't seen them. Like your Highness, this is my first time coming to the kingdom's borders. In the center of the country, in the castle, only a few people would have encountered the real demons. If he needed to evacuate once a year, how would he be able to develop this place?" He initially thought that the border town was a barren land, but that it still had the potential for development, but now it seemed to be a pipe dream. When we resist the demonic beasts in Longzong's stronghold, when they aren't invincible and when they can be killed, then why can't we defeat them in this border town as well? Longzong's stronghold has a high wall. Also, the Duke Ryan's elite troops are stationed there. It is nothing like this border town, this small place definitely cannot be compared to it, Briv explained. From the start, the establishment of the border town was to provide an early warning to the stronghold. Therefore the town was set between the slope of the North Mountain and the Chishui River. So, his town was only cannon fodder to block the enemy. The only path they could cross. Roland laughed grimly as he heard this. Chapter 8 Months of the Demons, Part 1. If Roland wanted to develop his territory well, he had to build strong roots in this place. Even though this land was a wasteland, it could be easily reclaimed. When the territory was too small, it could be expanded outwards, but all talk was useless if the people weren't willing to stay. If they could be forced to abandon a plot of land at any time, then who would be willing to purchase it? Who would want to improve its production? After the assistant minister left, Roland called in Knight Commander Carter and ordered, "Assemble your men, go and find some of the local guards, hunters and farmers. They must have lived here for more than 5 years, and experienced the months of the demons. If there is someone who can fight, it would be even better." After the knight saluted and left, Roland rubbed his forehead, continuing to look at the data compiled by the assistant minister. The main exports of the border town were from mining and hunting, and the bulk of the imports were food items. Everything would be transported through Longzong stronghold or directly through the Chishui River in Willow Town. The mining exports contained all kinds of minerals, like iron, copper, sulfur, rock crystal, ruby, sapphire. This was completely against the concept of associated minerals. He thought of what Anna had said to him, that the North Mine had been rumored to be an unknown underground layer. Until now there was no proven bottom to the mine, and it was also unknown how many forks the mine had. The minerals exported by the town weren't paid for with the kingdom's gold royals, instead they were paid for with the foodstuffs that arrived. It stands to reason that, since the gems could be regarded as a high-priced luxury, that in these last 5 years the border town could save a surplus of grain, but in the end there was no surplus. In other words, the annual output of the mining of the border town was only enough for 2,000 people's yearly rations. Before the prince arrived here, the border town was governed by the duke, who also took charge of Longzong's stronghold, and he had set up this arrangement. In his point of view, he could save food and had a warning for the monsters. The fur trade was part of the local people's own proceeds. They ventured into the westward forest, hunted some birds and other animals, maybe sold them to the Longzong stronghold, or to the residents of the small town of Willowleaf. Because of this, no transaction would be made in the border town, and so no tax could be collected. Roland thought, since he came, it couldn't go on in this way. The minerals could no longer be paid for with food. The Chishui River ran through the whole kingdom, and the traffic was not blocked. There was a transportation artery. Even if we would no longer buy food from the Longzong stronghold, there were still other places to provide them. This was all built on the premise that he could stay here in the border town, blocking those damn monsters. Carter worked quickly. By the next day he had found 2 local guards and a hunter and reported, "These 2 men are from the town patrol. Every year they are responsible for lighting the beacon." The hunter said he and the demons had crossed paths. He returned with a demon beast's head, which he cut off with his own hands. The 3 people bowed simultaneously. Roland nodded, permitting them to stand up. One of them stepped forward to speak. "Honor. Respected Prince. Your Highness." The first guard, who was called up, was too nervous to even speak clearly. "Ryan and I are the people, When it begins to snows, we will go to the north slope of the mining area. To the beacon tower there it's first possible. It is the first point to see the demon movements, if they cross over in great numbers. We will conceal ourselves in the forest. Ignite the flames, from childhood. The road we will withdraw at, and the boat is prepared previously. Then we leave. Since you both were together, let your partner answer it." Roland covered his face to hide his disapproval. "The demon beasts, can they be killed?" The other guard was also very nervous, but at least he did not stammer, "Your Highness, it should be so. They were just ordinary animals in the forest, but through the influence of the evil miasma they become manic and ferocious, but they can still be killed." Every month of the demons in the past, Longzong's stronghold would send cavalry, cleansing the land from the stronghold to border town of the remnants of the demon monsters. "The months of the demon last how long?" Roland asked. "Generally 2 to 3 months. It depends on the sun," said Brian. "Depends on the sun?" Roland asked doubtfully. "Yes," the guard explained, "Your Highness came to this town not long ago, so you do not know. In this border town, once the snow begins to fall it will not stop, until the sun shines again, then the snow will be gone. So the snow indicates the end of the months of the demon? Roland recalled that at least in Grey Castle it was not like this. Basically the next day it would end to snow, also the sun would seem to be different. It is exactly like this. The longest time I experienced the months of the demon was 2 years ago, that lasted nearly 4 months, many people starved. Why, shouldn't be the grain reserves in Longzong stronghold be large enough to support the town? Roland asked. Brian's face got a little angry, they had enough. But Reynolds, the municipal administrator who is responsible for managing such things, declared that the amount of ore and minerals mined was only enough to buy food for 3 months. For the 4th month we had to deliver a new shipment of ore. But the months of the demons had not ended, we couldn't leave the fortress. So that was what happened. I got it. They were simply alienating the full people. If Longzong stronghold treats these people who are living on the frontier with this kind of warmth like a spring wind, the frontiersmen would most likely want to stay and not leave, but at the moment it seems that the group of people behind Longzong stronghold were not the good-natured sort. Roland beckoned the last person forward to answer, while putting the name of the administrator into his heart. The third man looked courageous and strong, with a height of over 6 feet, making Roland feel great pressure. Fortunately, he came forward on his knees. You said you killed the beast? Yes, sir. His voice was low and hoarse. A wild boar species and a wolf species. Species? Roland repeated, what do you mean? This is the name of the mnemonic beast, Your Highness. The more fierce the variation of the animals was before, the more difficult it would be to deal with variation after. And they will emphasize the advantages of the body. The wild boar, its back fur would become extremely tough, even within a range of 50 yards it would be difficult to hurt it with a crossbow. The wolf species becomes more cunning, the running speed becomes amazing. To kill it, you need to set up the trap in advance. Stronger would become stronger and faster even faster. Roland nodded as he heard this, but they are still animals. They are, but they are not the most terrible kind of enemy, the hunter said until here, and then he had to swallow his saliva, before he was able to talk further. The worst ones are the mixed species. They are devils incarnate, only hell is able to create such a horrible monster. I have seen a hybrid. It had not only beast-like strong limbs, but on his back was even a pair of huge wings, allowing it to fly short distances. And it always knew where I was, no matter how much I tried to hide, it could always detect me. It was not hunting its prey, Your Highness, it was just teasing the prey. The hunter Liu lifted his clothes, showing a large scar extending from the abdomen to his chest as he said, I lost my consciousness and fell into the Chishui River. I was lucky to survive. Such a monster exists. Roland felt that the world became more and more like a fantasy. A strong wall can block all ordinary kinds of demonic beasts, but if they could fly, what should he do? Mixed species should be very rare, right? Chapter 9 Months of the Demons, Part 2. Not many, Your Highness, the hunter replied. During every month of the demons there will only appear 2 to 3 mixed species demons, otherwise Longzong stronghold would be in huge trouble. Well, you seem to be very observant, Roland ordered the man to stand up and asked, what's your name? You don't look like a man from my kingdom of Grey Castle. Half of my lineage hails from the Mojin clan, the townspeople call me Iron Axe. Mojin clan, the people from the Shaman kingdom, located southwest of the Barren Lands, it was said that they were the descendants of giants. Roland searched within his brain for any memories related to the Mojin clan and realized that Iron Axe did not use the name his clan called him by, rather using the name given by the people of Border Town, and apparently he did not want to have a relationship with the Shaman kingdom. As for why, since it was obvious that he was from the southwestern border of the Desolate Lands, he estimated that there were a series of sad stories involved. But for the moment those stories weren't important. Everyone was welcome in Border Town, regardless of his or her background. Roland clapped his hands. That's not why I asked you to be here, Carter. Bestow each of them with 10 silver royals, then they can leave. "Thank you very much for the reward, Your Highness," said the three in unison. Afterwards the people were taken away by Carter. When he had finished his task, Carter returned once again and asked, "Your Highness, why did you ask them these questions? Do you want to stay here?" Roland didn't express any opinion and instead asked, "What do you think?" "This matter is out of question, Your Highness," said the knight loudly. According to the statement from the hunter, even a wild demon bear would be difficult to cope with. Outside of 50 yards a shot with a crossbow would have no effect. We would have to wait until it close to 40 yards, or even until 30 yards before making our shot. Only our elite soldiers can accomplish this. Plus the demons are too numerous, and we can't rely on strong walls, only standing side by side with the local guards to stop them. I'm afraid that the casualties would outstrip the accomplishments. Our defeat would be assured. You already saw what a witch is able to do, so why do you can't think positively?" Roland sighed. The witches are evil, but Anna. Miss Anna does not look so. As your knight commander, I have to seek truths by looking for facts. If I would give you a city wall, would you think it will be possible?" "What?" For a moment Carter suspected that he had heard wrong. "If I give you a wall, between the north slope of the mountain and the Chishui River," Roland stressed every word he said, "although they would not be like the enormous walls from Grey Castle, but to stop animals, they should still be able to." "Sir, do you know what you are saying?" The knight didn't know whether to be angry or to laugh. "Even your nonsense should have a limit. If you don't stop, you will have to excuse my lack of manners. We still have 3 months, don't we?" I looked at the past records. The first snow usually falls here at the end of the second month from now. Even if we had 3 years it would not be enough. Building a wall would require many workers. For setting the foundation they have to compress the earth and every 1 or 2 feet would have to be reinforced, otherwise it would have a high risk to collapse. This would be the simplest of the earthen walls. Carter shook his head again and again. Brick and stone walls are even more difficult to build and it would need hundreds of masons who would first have to cut the stones or bake the clay into bricks. Afterwards they would need to build it block by block. Your Highness, all walls were built this way, without exception. A city being built in the time of a day and a night, that is only the stuff of legends. Roland indicated he had heard enough. "I see. You don't need to be so upset. If there is no reliable wall in place, I will evacuate with you to Longzong stronghold. I'm not going to give away my life in this place." The knight knelt down. "I will protect you." Afterwards in the beautiful castle gardens, Roland nipped at his bitter ale. Looking at Anna who was intently eating cream cakes, his mood recovered a lot. He had decided to stop the demonic beasts at the border town, joining the elite soldier with the town guards. He would also intensify the farming by expanding the area the guards patrolled. If he wanted to build the wall, connecting the north slope of the mountain and the Chishui River within 3 months, he must use an appropriate technology from the modern times. It was not the case that Roland had suddenly thought of this. Previously he had checked the edges of the border town, although he didn't go personally. In his memory remained a clear picture. The northern slope of the mountain and the Chishui River were only separated by 600 yards at their closest point. It was a natural bottleneck. And due to the all-year-round mining in the North Mine, it was surrounded by rock gravel mined from the cave. These gravel cast-offs were ash-gray, containing plenty of calcium carbonates, which could be used as limestone after grinding. With the limestone he had his solution. It would be equal to cement. Yes, this would change the history of mankind, to be able to build with a water-hardening material, with raw materials which were easily to obtain, which were simple to prepare. It truly numbered among one of the most efficient tools for tilling the fields. Roland estimated the needed time. Even if he would implement new technology, even with cement he wasn't sure if it was possible. The amount of cement they actually needed was too big. He wasn't sure if they could calcine so much cement powder within 3 months. And concrete toughness would be inferior. In the end they would need to reinforce it with steel, thus the probability to succeed in building a concrete city wall was not that great. They had to maximize the usage of the existing materials and save cement, so building a fieldstone wall would be the most appropriate choice. The so-called fieldstone was a stone which had not undergone any grinding, it was just a natural byproduct of mining. This stone, because of the irregular shape of the edges and corners, there was no way to directly using it to build, instead it first need to be processed by the stonemason into usable bricks. But building a fieldstone wall while using cement as binder was possible, regardless of how oddly shaped the stone was it could be used. The gap between the stones was filled by the cement, saving cement and using leftover materials. With this the big direction was set, but the actual implementation, he was afraid he would have to do it by himself, thought Roland. Regardless of whether it was the calcined cement or fieldstone wall, both were new things. Except for himself, no one had seen these things, and also no one knew how to make them. He was afraid he would be very busy for the next 3 months. "You, look here." The sound of Anna's clear voice came from behind him. As Roland turned, he saw a small cluster of flames in her palm quietly burning. There was clearly no wind, but the flame tip was rising up and down, as if it would nod to her. She shook her finger, and the fire was like a toddler, moving slowly towards the tip of the finger. In the end, it stood at the top of the index finger, simmering down. "You did it." It was an incredible scene. Roland felt admiration from the bottom of his heart. This was not illusion magic, nor a chemical trick, but it really was a supernatural power. But this was not the most attractive thing to Roland. Many times more dazzling than the flame, was Anna's look. While she was intently staring at her fingertips, the lake water limpid eyes were reflecting the vibrant flame, as if an elf sealed within a sapphire. The traces left from the prison torture had already faded, though she rarely smiled, but her face was no longer lifeless. On the young lady's tip of her nose was a speck of sweat, the rosy color on her white checks emitted vitality, even looked at also can let a person feel cheerful mood. "What happened to you?" "Ah. Nothing." Roland noticed he looked at her for too long. He removed his gaze and coughed. "Well, then, try using it to melt the iron." In the past few days, except for eating and sleeping, she always repeated her practice. In front of the hard-working enthusiast Roland could only endlessly blush in shame. Even in the face of the college entrance examination he did not work so hard. Apparently she will not need long, until she completely grasps this power, Roland thought. Following that, his ideas of new projects can be set on the agenda. TN, for information about concrete and why it is logical that he was able to invent it. Chapter 10 The Stonemason. This week, the weather wasn't good, the sky was always gray. Carl Van Bate's mood was like the weather, gloomy to the extreme. Walking on the wet stone street, from time to time there were people greeting him. In this town, Carl ran a school. At Grey Castle those noble children with the talent to go to school, attended a different kind of college. Here he was also teaching for the children of ordinary people. Therefore, in this border town, he had a very high reputation. "Hey, Mr. Van Bate, good morning." "Sir, is my son doing all right?" "When are you free, Carl? Let's go fishing together." At ordinary times Carl would always smile and would respond to them, but today he just nodded, never saying a word. Since he witnessed the hanging of Anna, in his eyes the world appeared to be flawed, or to say since his departing from Grey Castle a crack seems to be rising into existence, but he deliberately turned a blind eye. He used his busy work to numb himself, and to a certain extent, he even used the innocent smile of the students, to cover this crack. Until Anna died, he thought, that the world had not changed. But after the hanging, the crack not only did not disappear, but it expanded. Regarding Anna, he recalled the memories of the previous half a year. Within more than 30 children in her class she stood not out, with a normal appearance. She was never a person of many words, but there was something that let Carl felt a little impressed. That was her passion for knowledge. No matter what they would teach, characters or history, she could always remember it on her first try. Even if it was the boring history and evolution of the religion, she was always seen holding a book. He had seen the young lady help to take care of her neighbor's sheep, sitting down in the sun. Anna would carefully brush the sheep's hair, gently, like someone would do it with a baby. The picture he could still remember very clearly was the sweet smile of a happy girl, no matter what or how he could not think of her as a sinister and evil person. Later there was a fire at her place, and Anna's mother unfortunately passed away. Afterwards Anna never came back to college. He never saw her again, until a week ago, when she was proved to be a witch and hanged in the town square. Be tempted by the devil. An unclean person. Evil. All fart. In his heart, he had for the first time doubts about the Holy Church. For the first time he doubted the knowledge they imparted. Whether or not Anna was a witch, he didn't know, but she would never turn evil. If a yet immature girl, a girl ignorant of the world and full of curiosity could be called evil, then the administrative officials of Grey Castle were from hell and possessed by the devil too. In order to save several hundreds of gold royals, they deliberately stole stone material in exchange, leading to the collapse of the half-finished theater building. More than 30 masons of their guild had died. But were they hanged? Not even one. The judge finally ruled that the leader of the stonemasons was unsuitable for his job. He was punished into exile. The stonemasons were forced to disband. And Karl, who knew the inside story, fled out of the limelight and left Grey Castle. He followed the road into the west, eventually ending in the border town. He managed to establish a college. With a lot of students, he already got to know the new neighbors. He found new friends, but the crime from the officers of Grey Castle was always engraved in his mind. Now, once again he felt the world was mocking him. What was evil? The gods of heaven, could they really see it clearly? The last overwhelming straw for Karl was Nana. Nana and Anna were nothing alike, one could even say they were the complete opposite. She was a very lively girl, quite well known in the college. Only seldom attending class, and when she was there, she could never pay attention, only lying in the grass. If you asked what she did, she would giggle for a while, and then she would answer that she was looking at a fight between a grasshopper and ants. Nana's face was always full of laughter, it seemed to be her nature. The evil world had nothing to do with her, at least in the college, she could always be happy and was able to laugh. Karl was even a little curious, if she had ever cried since she was born. Until 2 days ago, when suddenly, with a long face, Nana came to find him. "Teacher, will I be hanged too, like Anna?" This let him know, his student, Nana had become a witch. "Ah, isn't that teacher? Come over here and help us to look at what it says." Karl felt as if someone had pulled his sleeve. He looked up and found that he had arrived at the town square. Many people stood around the board and shouted that someone should let them know what the announcement said. Hearing Van Bate's name, everyone consciously get out of his way. "Teacher, you coincidentally came, help us to look at it." "You are right, originally it was Meg who would read this to us, but the end result was, that before he could tell it to us, he got stomachache and had to go to the toilet. Until now he did not come back." Like always, he nodded with a smile, then he explained in detail the content of the bulletin board to everybody who listened. But at the present Karl discovered it was impossible. The smiles and enthusiasm of these people was not fake, but for him it was. But seeing this, it became more and more intolerable to wear the fake mask himself. The post of the hanging of Anna was placed above the notice. Everyone was cheerily discussing about it. "In a sense, you were her murderer," he could say it only in his own heart. "Your ignorance and fear had killed her." Karl had to swallow down his emotion, took a deep breath and walked to the front of the announcement list. The prince called for hands to help with the construction of new buildings for the border town. "A variety of different kinds of jobs is available," he said. "But I am also one of her killers, and what qualifications do I have to blame them? The one who told them that witches were evil, was it not me?" Karl had a bitter taste in his mouth. "Look, everything they knew I have taught them, word by word the Holy Church doctrine. I always thought I taught well, to hell with it. Stone grinder, they have to be male, from 20 years to 40 years old and healthy. Payment, 25 bronze royals per day. Mud craftsman, not limited to gender, over 18 years old, they should have experience in masonry, the daily payment would be 45 bronze royals. Handyman, requiring to be men, 18 years of age or older, 12 bronze royals per day. No, he had to do something. If Anna's death has been irreparable, then at least he couldn't let Nana die. Carl heard his inner voice shouting, "The Mason Guild collapsed when you did not stand up. Anna was hanged when he did not stand up. Do you like what happened when you stayed silent?" Helplessly looking at these lovely child, when she would be sent to the gallows. But what could he do? Could he flee with Nana out of border town? He had his own family, a family who traveled with him from Grey Castle. Just when their life got better, would they need to leave again? Even Nana herself, who was born into a rich family, would she leave her fixed place of life? Stonemason, not limited to gender, age is not limited, preferred are people who participated in building for the municipal administration, like the stronghold, or other fortifications. The city hall recruit for long term, with monthly remuneration of 1 gold royal. Additional term, people with rich experience and excellent performance, could get granted an official position. After reading the notice, the people become even more noisy, paid monthly 1 gold royal. This is even better than the payment for the stronghold cavalry. Will you go? Can you build a fortress? You, just don't only stare at this, go get a job. Every day you would get paid for the work, count together you would not get much less than with hunting. Indeed, when going to hunt it is possible to lose one's own life, and when you have to dodge it is also possible to get lost. Carl van Baet did not pay attention to this, he concentrated on the seal and signature on the final notice. It was the autograph from Roland Wimbledon, the 4th prince. Did the prince not know that the month of the demons was already coming? Whatever he wants to build, at the moment it's not a good time to start. It seems His Highness knew nothing about constructions, provided that oneself could become the stonemasons, would he then brought to his attention. Carl had suddenly an idea, perhaps through this recruitment, he could see the prince himself, the highest ruling in border town. This thought let Carl swallow a mouth of saliva. Could he convince the prince that the witches were not evil? There were rumors of His Royal Highness' unique ideas. He should have a character different from ordinary people, but also that he hated the church very much. Maybe he could do it. He thought, although in the end the hanging of Anna was ordered by Prince Roland, but everyone could see he was not willing to do it. The prince himself was still in his early 20s, this should make it easier to understand. Those girls were still in the marriageable age, how will they suddenly become evil and do unforgivable acts? Of course, there was a possibility that Carl would end as a witch helper, he would have to go to the gallows, together with the witch. The church's law stipulates that anyone who shielded a witch or who would plea for leniency, should be regarded as someone to abandon himself and become a demon disciple. Only the prince who hated the church, could be his last hope, since only he could declare the church's law as a waste of paper. Carl prayed in his heart. Even though he did not know to which god he should pray, he closed his eyes and prayed for a blessing. In memorial of the dead Anna, for the sake of Nana who was still alive, and for himself, so that his own heart crack would no longer expand. He decided to take the risk. Hi. This is Novel Admire. Thanks for the visit. Chapter 11, Third Princess, the sea breeze has become so cold. While gazing at the boundless ocean surface, Garcia Wimbledon said while stroking out her wind-tangled hair with a feeling of regret in her voice. Because the winter is coming, she said, looking back at the handsome man standing behind her and giving him a reply. Although this is the South, it is not the deep South. There, people don't understand what winter means. During the winter our fleet cannot be in the port, the ocean current will hold them down, we will be unable to move a single step. So at this time, they should be at the last voyage. The woman turned around. Ryan, how much time has passed since the Black Sail fleet has set sail? 2 months and 4 days, the man answered without hesitation. If nothing else happens, within 3 days they will arrive at the port of Clearwater. She laughed. I hope they can give me a sufficient surprise. Ryan looked at the woman in front of him, his heart was filled with emotion. When reflected by the autumn sun, her gray hair had traces of silver in it, her long and narrow eyes were russet green. While looking at her, you would feel an indescribable sense of oppression. Due to staying at the coast for a long time, her skin had gotten slightly rough. It was not longer as white as all the other women of the royal family were, but Ryan did not complain. In his eyes, Garcia had the temperament that cast any other beauty into the shade. Compared with those inbred idiots from the Grey Castle flock, she appeared to be different. Rather, the daughter of King Wimbledon III was a true genius. She possessed the wisdom and pride of a noble woman, however unlike the other nobility, who would scrupulously abide by common sense. On that point, she was even a bit like the civilians, breaking away from the ordinary, filled with expectations, with an extremely rich spirit for adventure. Of course, no civilian would have this kind of ability and vision, to join the rank of a duke right away. Compared to her, even the other aristocracy appeared to be lacking in foresight. All of the trade income of the port of Clearwater was to be reinvested into the fleet construction, no coin was to be left in their treasury. The light of a miser would not shine very far. Hiding a gold royal in the cupboard would be without any meaning. When you don't use it, it will be like a stone. Only when you take it out, can it reflect its own value. The point is to spend it wasn't equal to losing it. As long as the investment is on the spot, the reward you gain will go far beyond your own investment. This auspicious method, Ryan could still deeply remember her telling it to him. It was almost like she was anointing his head with the purest balm. It easily broke through all the inherited concept of his former teachings. Compared to those nobles who spent their whole day saving and trying to increasing the amount of their gold royals, Ryan had the feeling that this was the true method of a ruler. So he has boldly placed his life under Garcia's command, vowing to follow her to the port of Clearwater. After they had arrived here, Ryan had found out that the third princess was far more than her philosophy. Not only was she a person of philosophy, furthermore she was also a person of action. At the center of her plan was her Black Sail fleet, and on the path to her ambitions, there was no hindrance that was allowed. Already 5 years had gone by. Garcia's forces have infiltrated the port of Clearwater, organized and prepared her Black Sail fleet, and then, her father, Wimbledon III, started the strive for the position of the king. In other words, even from the beginning, she had already walked in front of all the other heirs. Let's go back inside the room. The wind is becoming more and more powerful, Garcia said. Her palace was located at the Blue Water Port, above the National Harbor. The tower-like building seemed to be a protector station above the shore. On the top of the tower was a circular terrace, with an unobstructed field of view. It was possible to have a bird's eye view from the entire harbor, seeing the coming and going of the merchant ships. Today, after her 5-year operation, the business plan in the port of Clearwater had already begun to take shape. Every 6 months a bark would be launched. Furthermore, she had already obtained the people's trust. While the third princess seemed to be in good mood, Ryan hesitantly raised his biggest doubt, which has haunted him for months. "Your Highness, there is one thing I do not understand," he said as he shut the door, leaving the roar of the sea breeze outside. "You may speak," she nodded while smiling. "How could you have foreseen all of this, even before the king has announced the king's order?" He had also thought that it would be impossible that her father Wimbledon III would mention it to her in advance, but even after having carefully thought this matter over he still hadn't come to a conclusion. Everyone knew that the second prince was the heir that the king valued the most. The king's order had been set up for him. This point could be seen by everyone, since the second prince had gotten Valencia as fiefdom. Could she have guessed all of this on her own, furthermore already having started 5 years ago laying out her plan? God, she was only 18 years old. Foreseen? She showed a funny look. "Do you take me for a witch? I don't have that kind of ability." But. Furthermore, I did not know that my father would declare the strife for the king order, paving the way for his treasured second son. In fact, there exists no connection between the strife for the king order and my plan. There was no relationship. When Ryan suddenly became aware of this aspect, his mouth became wider and wider. Seeing the expression of disbelief on Ryan's face, Garcia smiled. "Don't tell me I should have waited for my father to first tell me that I should fight for the throne. Would I have then have had the ability to fight for the throne? Similarly, would it really in the end have been the one who governed his town the best be the one to sit on the throne of Grey Castle? I thought you understood my plan when you had seen the Black Sail fleet." "So that's the reason," Ryan murmured. "Her fleet is not only for the battle of the throne. This fleet belonging to the third princes could change the sails after leaving the port, robbing the ships from other cities and countries. Similarly, the third princes encouraged the people to go out to the sea, to participate in her Black Sail fleet. She promised, all the loot would become the property of the ship's captain, the port of Clearwater would never collect any tax toward this profit. This move would bring her huge wealth, so this time she had simply ordered the Black Sail fleet to sail straight south, to plunder any ship which passed the Endless Cape, as well as the people of the southern Shaman. And these measures were not just for money. She did not take the plundered wealth to build cities or expand the land trade, she just invested it back into the yard and continued to build more ships. In the past few years, she had gained a large number of experienced sailors and fierce warriors, and also embraced the people's hearts and minds. If she couldn't continue to govern, all those who had participated in the plundering of the ships and villages would also be sent to the gallows. The best in governance of his territory would end on the throne of Grey Castle. No, Ryan now knew, to be able to sit on the throne, she would need to posse numerous warships and soldiers, then she could follow the Sanguine River, even reaching out to pressure the city of Golden Harvest. "You knew that you would be assigned to the port of Clearwater?" This, contrary to what one might think was unexpected, ideal to increase the business value of this place, Garcia shrugged. "Originally it was a payback to the church who tried to fool me." "Related to the church?" Seeing his counterpart haven't said anything more, Ryan also did not dare to question further. But he knew, even if Garcia had not come to Port of Clearwater, this place would still have followed her will, and moved according to her desired direction. Putting those matters aside, she poured herself a cup of black tea. The little trick from before seems to have failed. "Ah, yes," Ryan, who hurriedly recovered his thoughts, replied. "There is only news coming from Border Town. They reported that the pills have failed. There is no news from the other places." "No news should mean they were killed by my brothers, nothing to be surprised about. Originally they were chess pieces who had been easily arranged, only to be used in the meanwhile. However," she changed the subject, "for other pieces to fail is normal, but I would not think even my fourth brother would still be safe and sound. To tell the truth, I'm a little disappointed. Kingfisher said in the secret message, that the prince certainly ate it, but a failure is still a failure. I don't want to hear any excuses," Garcia interrupted. "Soon it will be the time of the months of the demons. Our lovely brother will have to go searching for refuge in Longzong's stronghold, right? When the moment arrives that the demon beasts invade, I am afraid that he will need to stay for a long while inside of the stronghold. Write to her, tell her to take hold of this opportunity. I would like to see whether the goddess of fortune will stay by the side of fourth brother once again." "Yes, Your Highness." "You go ahead." Garcia waved her hand. When Ryan was about to leave, the princess called to him once more. "Ah, yes. I seem to recall that the pill had been bought from an alchemist master, wasn't it?" Ryan nodded. "What did he say back then?" "The pill would be colorless, tasteless, and will melt inside water. If it enters the mouth it will be incurable, a guaranteed death. It was his latest alchemical achievements, right?" Garcia yawned. "Hang him." Chapter 12 Firing. Roland stood by the kiln in the backyard, waiting for the first batch of cement being released. The brick house he had designed for the cement production was 15 meters long and 4 meters wide. The front and back had each a door. The front door was as spacious as possible, so that people could easily transport materials into the house. Instead, the back door was only 1 person wide. The only use was to let Anna secretly into the firing room. Therefore, he also built a wall halfway around the house. The import and export arrangements were guarded by knights. They were Carter's men. Loyalty was beyond doubt. The cement production process was very simple. First, the limestone would be grinded into powder, afterwards mix it with clay, iron powder, and then it would be calcined with a dry or wet method. It can be used after the final grinding with plaster. The raw materials were very common, only iron could be difficult to obtain and hold in a large number. The critical fact lies in the process to reach the right calcine temperature. Roland did not remember the specific temperature needed to produce cement. Even if he did remember it, he had not the possibility to measure and control the temperature. Whether it was an infrared thermodetector or a thermocouple temperature measuring gun, both were not available. This made the production of the cement countless times more complex. He only knew that the temperature was almost similar to the melting point of iron, and the calcination process was also a difficulty in the production of cement. In the era of the less advanced smelting technology, maintaining the temperature of the furnace has been a problem for all people. The heat loss of an ordinary open furnace was too great. It was difficult to maintain the temperature at 1200 degrees. But he would also need a high temperature resistance furnace. He would have to figure out how to make fire brick. The traditional iron making blast furnace would be forced to the point of melting. Temperature may be up to the standard, but the narrow chamber was too small for the cement calcination. Roland was afraid that the time until the months of the demons was not enough. Therefore, Roland's design for the kiln had no heating measures. He purely relied on Anna. The broken down particle of limestone and clay were mixed together with water into a slurry. This was evenly spread within the kiln. Then the knights locked the door and walked away. Anna entered from the back door. Her fire baked the earth slurry until it melted together with the iron powder. Roland was somewhat restless. This was his first step to upgrade Border Town. If he couldn't produce cement, building a wall within 3 months would be empty talk. Without the wall, there would be no people willing to stay in this place. Whether it was real life or fictional literature, if you want to progress forward, a stable base is essential. Your Highness, this kind of product can really hold the stones together? Carter, who was at the side of the fourth prince, asked. Although the prince had told him this was the latest research results of the alchemists of Grey Castle, but he was still skeptical. After all, those people really haven't made any useful products. Who knows? Anyway, they said it would. Roland spread out his hands. The world of alchemy and astrology were known as the sage art. In the mainland, these professions were very popular. In general, the royal family would develop their own alchemists and astrologers, for refining and predict the fate. For ordinary people, these studies were too classy. In view of this, Roland naturally set the source of cement formulations to the alchemical head. As for the chief knight, he didn't matter. Through the window they could see the flame gradually stopped to burn. It seemed the calcination was done. When Roland stood up and went to look, Carter was driven out of the garden, so he waited alone in front of the back door for the brick. The gates creaked open and Anna walked out. First thing Roland did was to drape a robe over her, and brought her a cup of water. "How are you?" The face of the witch was full of dust. Due to the wet processing system, the amount of dust was low, but the hot air needed for calcination produced still some dust. She was not wearing a mask. Staying inside for more than 10 minutes was obviously not too comfortable. She coughed and nodded. The slurry already changed into powder. Roland waited until the temperature in the kiln dropped low enough. Still, then he wrapped a wet towel around his head. He grabbed the shovel and got into the back door. He was instantly surrounded by the hot air. For some time he felt it was difficult to breathe. The skin on his hands was roasted immediately. Fortunately, taking a shovel of powder took not much time, otherwise if staying for a few minutes in this environment would cause a high temperature shock. "Is this what you wanted?" asked Hannah, who was now wearing the witch outfit. "It looks very much like it." Roland spread out the fine powder flat on the ground, using his finger to sense the temperature. "To know it definite we will need to test it." "What's the use of it?" "It is for building houses, or repairing bridges and the roads. It can be used in many other places too. If it is successful, afterwards the people will be unafraid of the wind, or that their homes could be destroyed by the cold, rain or snow." With the other hand he patted the girl's head. "This was only possible thanks to your ability." Anna lowered her head. Roland did not know if it was or wasn't an illusion, but he felt that the girl's breathing got faster after he patted her. "According to the theory, it is important to fire the grinded materials together with the gypsum. With this it would possible to adjust the hardening time. But now it would be needless to think so much." After a short break Roland took the shovel again and grasped to more, then he called Carter who stood outside the courtyard over, letting him prepare 3 different mixtures of the powder with the sand to compound cement mortar. The chief knight completely didn't mind this manual work. For him, doing this kind of matter was many times better than the substitute fights for his highness, when he got into a brawl with other young lords while he was on an outing with young ladies, prostitutes, in Greycastle. Because in the raw material was not added any iron powder, the color and luster that came out were lighter than the average, appearing to be ash gray. Roland spread the grout on a brick, and then putting down another brick upon it. The cement solidification time would be around 4 hours, but taking into account the pre-production of instability, he intended to simply wait until tomorrow to see the results. The second day early in the morning, Roland, Carter and Anna hurriedly rushed to the firing place in the backyard. When he opened the door, he saw that the cement had the appearance of the solidification condition. The 2 pieces of brick were tightly bound together. The consolidation appeared to be uneven, on some places appeared hoarfrost. Roland crouched down, scraping off the aroused hoarfrost, trying to press his finger into the hardened cement. The touch made his heart feeling pleased. The cement surface was solid, completely different from the touch of rammed earth, namely, the use of the nail to scrap didn't leave any traces. Carter repeated the action of the 4th prince, attempting to move the rock, but he also did not succeed. He even resolutely kicked against the side with his foot, until the connection between the cement and earth broke, but the 2 pieces of bricks were still firmly bonded together. At last, he swung the hilt of his sword against the brick, but only a small piece at a corner broke away. "This is the effect of cement," Carter immediately realized its role. "It is incredible. Yesterday it could also flow like a melted candle, just one night later, it's like a rock. With this kind of material, with this building the city wall would go much faster. As long as we have enough stones, we could even build a wall around the border in 5 years. What's the use of that?" Roland did not accept it as the correct way. The tall wall would be unable to stop any enemy who comes from the inside. "I would rather turn the old wooden homes of border town into solid concrete rooms, so that my people no longer need to worry about a natural disaster turning them homeless." The chief knight was speechless. He really did not expect the 4th prince with all his kinds of bad habits would say this. "In the future, you will see," Roland reaffirmed himself one more time about the importance of the road he would walk. With regard to the numerous battles he needed to fight, science and technology was the first production capability. And here, the witch was the first productivity. Chapter 13 City Wall. Soon the cement production got on the right track. In order to permit Anna a sufficient amount of rest, the kiln was only used 2 to 3 times a day. To obtain the most out of each calcining process, they had to get more raw materials. For this, Roland once again issued orders to recruit more workers, until their current numbers were doubled. But he also knew that he could not rely on only Anna to do the firing. People who were working long-term in a dusty environment, would eventually become sick. Furthermore, once future production scale increased, Anna alone would not be enough to satisfy the demand. The witches should not be used as consumables. Instead, they should serve as an engine to promote the development of civilization. Although Roland was already aware of this fact, at the moment, he could only invest all of his energy and manpower in building the city wall. After all, if they couldn't stop the demon beasts, everything else would become unimportant. Digging out the foundation for laying the city wall had already started in order to connect the northern slope with the Chishui River to increase the production speed. He personally took charge of the overall project. He dug out the first shovel of earth with his own hands in front of the shocked masses of surrounding onlookers. Roland thought after the problem with the cement was solved, building the city wall would be easy and relaxing. But he soon found out that his prior experience in engineering wasn't enough to understand a word from the project. How deep and wide did the foundation have to be? How to resolve the different heights of the sections? How to ensure that the more than 600 yards long wall would be built in a straight line? He had previously seen the construction of a road by a group of young men. They were looking at a scale on their measure instruments. It was called a theodolite and level, right? But both of those tools didn't exist here. As an unfortunate mechanical engineer, although Roland and the civil engineer next door were called the two engineering dogs, the content they were actually learning was poles apart. Of the mud artisans who he'd hired, no one had ever been involved in the construction of major projects. It could even be said that his own understanding was better than theirs. Therefore, building the wall started very slowly. It took an entire week to dig out barely half of the foundation they needed. Once a project got out of control, it would be difficult to say how the final product would look like. For example, this dugout foundation, which was hard to dig, came out a shallow groove, rather than the foundation of the wall. It more suited to be called a drainage ditch. Despite Roland's descriptions, the width they dug out was more or less individualized. Thus, the width got clearly out of shape, becoming more and more narrow. While standing at a distance, the foundation practically resembled a curving and twisting snake. Even so, Roland was unwilling to stop the project. With little else than the digging on his mind, as long as it was not the time of the firing, which was Anna's job, he would stay at the northern slope for the rest of the day. Adjusting the direction of the pit's extension with the naked eye, slowly moving forward. Simultaneously, he also doubled the reward for enlisting stone craftsmen. Fortunately, this predicament did not last long. When Roland was preparing the 6th cement calcining, the assistant minister reported that a stonemason responded to the recruitment. It was said he was a former member of the Mason Guild. The people who were waiting for an audience had been already taken to the outside of the hall. When he got this information, he nearly burst for joy. In his memories, the Grey Castle Mason Guild was a famous organization. Even the 4th Prince had heard their name. But in the end, because of a construction error, they were ordered to disband. But how can we finish this without help from stonemasons? Take him in, Roland put on a calm expression and nodded. He originally wanted to tell Anna she should leave, but then he thought it wouldn't be a problem. Border Town had more than 2,000 people, very few had seen the true face of the witch. Moreover, her look now, in a bizarre new dress, and her appearance before, when she wholeheartedly courted death, when she was not her usual self, was worlds apart. He estimated that even if she was seen, she wouldn't be recognized. Karl van Bart felt restless when he was led into the courtyard by the knight. He intended to inform His Highness that this time of year was unsuitable to carry out a large-scale project. After acquiring His Highness' trust, he could slowly change the prince's view on witches. In the rumors, His Highness always acted wild. What should he do when it seemed he would get the contrary result of his advice? With his thoughts in a whirl as he bowed down, when he lifted up his head again, he suddenly stopped and stared blankly. The girl at the side of His Highness looked so familiar, he had felt that he was dreaming. Karl rubbed his eyes, then looked once again. He could not help but cry out, "Anna!" Roland's heart stopped for a beat. How was that possible? He just wanted to hire a craftsman, but who could know that the craftsman was also the witch's neighbor? He could tell that the other was absolutely familiar with Anna. If not, it would have been impossible to recognize her immediately. He looked at Carter. The chief knight got the hint. He immediately pulled the latch, blocking the only exit. Venerable teacher? Anna's reaction led Roland's spirits circle for a while before he came back to complete consciousness. What, teacher? It's really you, Anna. Carl only felt his eye socket warming up, and then there was something flowing down. He knelt powerlessly on the ground, constantly repeating, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Very good, too. Well. After Carl van Bart was able to calm his mood, he slowly stood up and then bent over once more to pay tribute to Roland again. I'm very sorry, Your Highness, I forgot my manners. This, in the inn, what is going on? Aren't you a mason? I used to be. When Carl had regained a calm mood, his speech became very fluent. His Highness had not killed Anna. The one who was hanged on the execution ground was substitute. Being aware of this point, he already knew how to progress further. Although it was unclear why the other party rescued a witch, but regardless, even if His Highness wanted to take her as his concubine, even that would be much better than being crucified. This shows that the prince wasn't afraid that the witches were the evil incarnation described in the rumors. He described his experiences of living in this border town, since the time he fled out of Grey Castle. Including, that he had opened a college here, and that he had found out that Nana Payan, one of his students, had also become a witch. Finally, he pleaded to His Royal Highness, that he would also take Nana into his palace, so that she would be safe from exposure. Anna, who stood at the side, had a caring expression on her face, while listening to the plea for Nana, but from the beginning to the end she never said a word. Yet another new witch. This truly was important, and good news, but he seemed to remember the name Payan. When Roland quietly asked the assistant minister, he got to know that this was in fact, a small aristocratic family of border town. You can take her to see me. If she's a witch, I will make sure that she doesn't get hurt, Roland promised, but I cannot take her away from the Payan family, especially when she had not suffered any threat from her material family. Also, me rescuing Anna is not what you think. He considered, telling the truth would be better. I need her help. The idea that they are the devil's force is absolutely nonsense. I believe that the power of the witch, regardless if it is good or evil, can be controlled. So Anna, Nana or any other witch, as long as they do not break any other law, I won't condemn them to death. Next, we will turn to the town business. You participated in the construction of the Grey Castle city walls? The prince quickly changed the topic back to the construction matters. Yes. Carl nodded. Although, His Highness the Fourth Prince did not resemble his prior knowledge of the prince, he did not expect that the prince would need a witch's assistance. However, his wish to protect Nana was accepted. That was enough. Well, I'm going to build a wall from the Chishui River to the foot of the northern slope. The goal is to ward off the demon beast invasion. From now on, this project is your responsibility. Chapter 14 Ability. Your Highness, how tall and wide should the city wall that you are planning to build be? It should be at least 15 feet high, 6 feet wide, allowing 4 men to advance side by side. Roland had to nod inwardly. Professionals truly weren't the same. They would first ask about the technical parameters and then determine the construction program. So it would require us to dig a trench 1 man deep to stabilize the upper part of the wall. In addition, for a 6-foot wide top of a 15-foot high wall, the width at the base needs to be at least doubled. Carl replied quickly, thus just digging the trench will consume a lot of manpower. Your Highness, if you give me 150 people, I should be able to dig this trench in the months prior to the demon's arrival. A trench cannot stop the evil beasts, Roland answered non-committally. That's true, but if we build the upper section of the city wall with stone masonry, it would take 3 years. In order to only stop the evil beasts, you needn't build the wall so high. Approximately 12 feet high should be enough. The width can also be reduced by a third, resulting in a 6-foot wide foundation. With the simultaneous digging of the trenches and building of the wall, as well as an increase of the workers to 200. That way, I could finish it by January next year, before the arrival of the demons. Carl paused, then said, "Please forgive me, Your Highness, this really isn't a good time to start. In case the construction of the wall is not on time, even if the trenches were dug well, they will lose their original form after the soaking rain and snow throughout the winter. When you return, instead of finishing it, you would need to spend more time and manpower just to clean up the softening trench, excavating and deepening it one more time. Say, in case we only build the wall 12 feet high and 4 feet wide, how long would you need to dig the trenches?" "It should be finished within 1.5 months, Carl replied. "Then do it according to this plan, trenching and masoning at the same time, so that we succeed a month prior to the arrival of the mnemonic beasts." Roland waved his hand, interrupting Carl, "I know what concerns you, but take a look at this. This is the latest work from the Grey Castle Alchemical Workshop." Naturally, he had no time to allow the stonemason to see the gluing process. Instead, he showed him 2 bricks, glued together from before. Fortunately, when the prince spoke, almost no one dared to question him. When Carl heard that this alchemical adhesive cement can turn from a liquid into a solid form overnight, furthermore, it came with a sky-high adhesion effect, his face exposed his incredible shock. As a stonemason who had dedicated half a lifetime into his work, he could naturally recognize how great this invention was. Apart from stone binding, the most important fact was that it was possible to freely shape its figure. Wouldn't that be equivalent to no longer needing a second cutting and polishing process, being suitable for any loosely shaped stone? The time-consuming processing stage could be abandoned, and the construction rate of any building would be raised to a whole new level. This alone was exciting enough. Roland looked at the expression on Carl's face with satisfaction, and once again asked, "What do you think, will 3 months be enough?" Carl van Baart's voice somewhat shivered. "If you're right, no, I mean. If the alchemical workshop described this matter correctly, I'm willing to try." "Very good, I will let people summarize the detailed information of cement for you. If there are still other needs to discuss it, then feel free to talk with my assistant minister." Roland laughed. "Mr. Carl, from now on you'll be the chief of the employee's office." On the next day Roland saw Anna in the afternoon. The little girl stared blankly at Anna, clutching her clothes for a long time, before saying, "I'm already dead?" The first time Roland saw her, he had to admit that the power of the witch did not only give them the ability to use magic. To some extent, it also changed their appearance and temperament. She and Anna were very different types, but both of them had a unique charm. This feeling had nothing to do with age, and it was also unrelated to their situation. Even when Anna was in jail, waiting for her death sentence, the radiance she emitted still continued unabated. He searched through his entire memory, whether it was a noble lady with a very good upbringing or a streetwalker in Greycastle, neither gave off such an aura. If one insisted on describing it, then compared with a witch, it was like the witches were the colors in a black and white photograph. She was brought over by Carl van Baart, who afterward retired tactfully, leaving only Roland, Anna, and Nana in the backyard. "You're not dead, Anna too is alive and well." Roland had to hold back a smile. "I'm the 4th Prince Roland Wimbledon, and you're—" "I'm Nana Payan." When the little girl heard that she herself did not die, her expression turned lively again. She ran straight to Anna's side, beginning to chatter with her, unconcerned, disregarding the identity of Prince Roland Wimbledon. Roland naturally didn't care what a 14 to 15-year-old girl had to say. Instead, he leaned on the round table and poured himself some ale, appreciating the day-to-day behavior from the side. Anna was clearly a little bit calmer. In the time Nana would say more than 10 sentences, Anna would say 1. Having said that, while Anna was only 17, she already exuded a big sister feeling. Roland couldn't help but think, when she grows up, how outstanding will she become? When Nana's speaking slowed down, he coughed, opened his mouth, and asked, "Miss Payan, I heard from your teacher that you have awakened as a witch." Compared to the vast majority of people who used the word fallen when becoming a witch, Roland preferred the term awaken. He was not naive enough to think that all witches were immaculate white. People who already had a malevolent personality would only create greater destruction. This is the same with weapons. They could produce violence, but they could also be used to resist violence. The crucial point is the person who holds the weapon. Perhaps the church's propaganda of the massacres caused by witches was based on the facts, but using this as proof that the whole witch community was guilty was the greatest of injustices. Nana's face once again stiffened. She whispered, "Will you hang me?" "No, of course not. The gallows are for heinous criminals. You're not one and Miss Anna is not one either, so don't worry about that." She took a breath and nodded. "I'm not sure. The teacher said witches were coerced by the devil and afterward got some evil powers. See, can I be possessed? Moreover, I have never seen the devil." "When did you find out that you, yourself, had become different?" "Roughly a week ago," Nana muttered. "I saw a bird with a broken leg and wanted to help it. And suddenly, I felt something flowing out of my hands." "There were things flowing out?" Roland asked. "What happened then?" "Ah! It suddenly enclosed the bird like a sticky bubble of water." Nana's head tilted when recalling this, then the bird's leg was healed. "Does she have the power of healing?" Roland's heart began to race. He was very clear what this ability would mean. With the absence of antibiotics, there was no modern medicine there. People with a traumas or infection would likely encounter death in these ages. As such, rapid wound healing was almost the equivalent of saving many lives. This ability is very limited in promoting the progress of civilization as a whole, but it has amazing significance for an individual life. He immediately went to the door, looking for a night to bring a living chicken. If it could be proved that what she said was true, he might be able to use this as a source to change the border town's view of the witches, ending the current situation of ruthless persecution. Chapter 15, Flattering Oneself. Seeing the knight accept his order and leave, Roland returned to the table. "You can heal small animals, so why would you think witches are evil?" The teacher said, "Witches can do what ordinary people cannot do, and sometimes it may not look bad, but that would be only a trap, set up by the devil to tempt more people." The girl trailed off. "I really have not seen the devil, I swear." "Of course you haven't seen him, that's merely the church's lie. Your teacher was also deceived by them," Roland soothed. "The church lies?" Nana's jaw dropped down. "Why?" Roland shook his head, giving no explanation. Even if he explained it, they wouldn't understand it. Before a civilization develops to a certain extent, these kind of outlandish things always happened. Even when no one benefited from it, people would automatically contribute natural disasters, man-made disasters, or incomprehensible phenomenons as a product controlled by someone behind the curtains. From historical point of view, this was a boulder which in majority women had to carry on their back. And in this world, witches who owned a feasible power of unknown origin became an easy target for the church. Thinking about it, it was absolutely impossible for the church to ignore this kind of extraordinary appearances, no matter what. They would have to confer all witches as saints, naming their powers as the gift of God, or kill all of the witches, stating they were the devil's spokesperson. However, once you choose the former, the majesty of monotheism would receive a heavy blow, as soon as a witch not belonging to the church emerges. In the case of all religions believing in other gods labeling the witches as saints, they would all be people chosen by God, and so whose God would be the only true God? Polytheism could only exist on the premise that all gods truly exist, capable of restricting each other. Since God was non-existent, this was all symbolic crap that someone had created by running off their mouth, So why permit the opposite side to exist and share this world with them? So anyone would claim their God as the true God and believe in monotheism. And when it come to a member of another religion, there was only one way to go: liquidation. In the end, they could only choose the latter option, to spare no effort in killing all the witches. There was absolutely no relation to the devil, it was only for their own benefits. A living chicken was prepared by the castle kitchen right away, and then the knight carried it by the wings, while it still fluttered and kicked in confusion. The next thing made Nana dumbfounded. Roland took the silver knife from his waist and had the knight grab it so that he could stab the chicken's body. When the chicken was wounded, Roland allowed Nana to come up and treat it. After curing it, another stab followed. This way they proceeded over and over again. After half a day, when the chicken finally took its last breath, Roland had a general understanding of Nana's ability. She could restore damaged parts, including cuts, tears, fractures and bruises. In case a part was missing, such as a cut-off chicken leg, she could not make it grow new one. However, under full use of her ability, the broken claw could be reconnected again, allowing the cut to be healed. Ultimately, she could not reverse death. Once the chickens died, her treatment was ineffective. During the entire course of treatment, Roland did not see any trace of the sticky water. Instead, she simply put her hand on the chicken's wound, and the wounds would heal at a rate visible to the naked eye. After these series of tests, Nana's physical exertion was not large. She was at least not sweating like Anna after her training. Only Nana herself was dissatisfied. She felt that the treatment of the chicken was unfair, to such an extent, that at the end of the experiment she widened her eyes and pouted at Roland. "Well, don't just stare there, come and have something to eat." Upon seeing her, Roland without any better option had to summon the afternoon tea to shift her attention. This move was already tested against Hannah. He thought that very few girls of their age could resist the temptation of delicious desserts. As it turned out, Nana's performance in front of the pastries was not much better than the former's. After eating the cake, Roland allowed Nana to leave. Anna asked, "Why did you allow her to leave?" "Just like me, she's also a witch, right? She still has her family, and at the present time her family has not found out that she has become a witch." Anna whispered, "It's just a matter of time." "Right, sooner or later," Roland sighed, "so, it's a little late, but... Do you want to see your father?" She shook her head, no wavering was seen in her lake-like eyes. It seemed that the betrayal of her father had made her completely lose her hope. She didn't have a family to return to before, at least now she had a friend. Nana will always come back. In fact, I'm going to have her come here every second day to let her practice her own ability. Hearing this, she blinked her eyes and nodded quickly. "Do you want to go back to Carl's college and learn together with the other children?" Anna did not answer, but he felt that he could understand her inner thoughts. These kinds of circumstances are unlikely to last long. As long as I am here, you will one day be able to live like normal people. Anywhere you go there would be no one to arrest you, much less send you to the gallows. One day this will be reality, said Roland, stressing every single word. "I promise." Since Carl took over the city wall project, 4th Prince Roland suddenly settled down. He spent every afternoon in the castle garden, accompanied by Anna and Nana. Now they had no further need to prepare extra clothes for Anna's training. Even if there were leaping flames on each of her fingers, she could still operate them skillfully. Now it was unlikely to be like before when a mishap occurred, igniting her own witch's uniform. Nana also changed her clothes into the same witch uniform Anna wore. At first she felt a little reluctant about the practice, but the afternoon tea session appeased her. Seeing the two witches come and wander around in his backyard greatly alleviated the bitterness in Roland's heart. Occasionally, he went to the north slope at the foot of the mountain to check the progress in the city wall. After more than 2 weeks of construction, the wall had already reached 100 yards in length. In this era where a theodolite to measure the distance didn't exist, every day, at the same time, Carl would have the craftsmen determine the distance and evenness by using the shadows formed by the sun with the help of a wooden pole. They built a watchtower every 10 columns to stabilize the city wall. Such a large-scale building project was naturally also noticed by the town's nobility, but in addition to finding Brave and asking him about this project, they took no further actions as if this had nothing to do with them. Roland did not complain, since their possessions were at Stronghold Longsong, they would definitely not stay here and help him guard the border town. He could even imagine these people getting together and ridiculing Roland, saying he had overestimated his capabilities. Not only had the nobility noticed the change, but the merchants as well. In the previous years, the traveling merchants would purchase animal fur, but now it appeared that there was no possibility to purchase it. One after the other, they began to set out and return to the stronghold. Naturally, the anger about their empty-handed return was vented to Roland. The news regarding the fourth Prince Roland Wimbledon's building project to repel the demonic beasts in the months of the demons had already spread along the Chishui River, many calling it just stupid and ignorant. At this point, no one thought that he could hold Border Town, even the majority of locals did not believe it. After all, the impression everyone got from the fourth prince did not include the courage to fight. Regardless what he did, in the end, he would take refuge in the stronghold. In this manner, while everyone was discussing him, Roland welcomed his first winter after crossing over. Chapter 16 Future Route. The flames in the fireplace were in full bloom, dispersing the chill which penetrated through the doors and windows. Above the huge fireplace hung the skull of a deer with long horns. In the glow of the fire, the shadows reflections of the horns on the back wall appeared to be huge claws and teeth companions of skull. Opposite of Roland stood a long deep red wooden table laden with parchments and books. Most of the documents only needed his signature to execute the order. Usually, Roland would only be here to handle official work, but since he had transformed the castle room into a 3-room office he had grown to love working here. Through the windows at the end of the floor he could see the town spreading out beneath his gaze, and in the horizon were the endless mountains. The mountains were almost impassable, they separated the kingdom of Grey Castle and the wildlands in two. The northern mountain slope was just a branching pass of the mountain range. At the foot of the window he could see the wood-fenced garden, which Anna used to train. In order to provide a convenient place for afternoon tea, the brick pool was already transformed into a long table. If the weather was good he could go down and lie underneath the sun, or maybe even take a nap on top of the custom-made rocking chair. Although it was small, it was nice to have your own personal garden as well. In his former life, if you wanted to sit on the stone steps of a real castle, it would be almost impossible. Just to look around, you had to spend money to buy a ticket. But now, he not only had his own castle, but a whole town as well. Your Highness, recently we spent a considerable amount of money from your treasury to recruit tradesmen and handymen. If this continues, I'm afraid our treasury won't last until next year's spring. Briv handed the parchment with the recent reports of the financial situation to Roland. Originally, Border Town had a very simple chart of income and expenditure. Their line of income came from ore mining and trade with precious stones. This line of income was in the hands of the Longsong stronghold. The output of the North Slope mine was directly exchanged for wheat or bread, without any taxes, and the exchange of resources was presided over by the stronghold. Described in simpler terms, the North Slope mine was a joint stock item of the Longsong stronghold nobility. Those nobles stationed in the border town could be seen as the custodians of the shareholders. Their fiefs were mostly in the east of the stronghold. They came here only for a limited time, and there would be different people each year. In fact, Border Town had less than 30 years of history. Compared with the nearly 200 years of Longsong's stronghold, it was simply a newborn baby. Duke Ryan had only intended to establish an outpost here to get an early warning in case an evil beast invasion began. He had never expected that the pioneers who discovered a mine rich with mineral resources in the northern mountain slope would just settle there, practically making a small municipality, Name Border Town. In order to prevent stealing, the Duke did not accept manpower sent by the other nobles. Instead, he employed the local residents. Even criminals became miners, and food was prorated based on the output of ore each home provided. The stronghold would just provide some food and commission employers throughout the year. The stronghold only paid a fixed amount of money, it wasn't based on the mining output. Of the 2,000 inhabitants of Border Town, more than half of them were in the mining services. Another line was the town's other industries, the blacksmith's shop, tavern, textile shop and so on. From them, Border Town usually received a modest amount of revenue throughout the year, but it was quite difficult to have money left over by the end of it. The appointed lord didn't govern Border Town seriously, since Roland was sent there from Greycastle. Instead, he had decided to stay in the stronghold, without returning to Border Town. As a result, when Roland wanted to hire someone to repair the walls, he could only pay them from his own pocket. If it was the fourth prince from before, he would have certainly never done it. But the current Roland, as long as he gained a firm foothold in this border town, even if he had to spend all his property, it would still be worth it. Anyway, after the ore trade would no longer be settled with food, the town's income would still be no more than a drizzle. The only question was if Longzong's stronghold was willing to give up their monopoly of trade with Border Town. This would be similar to entering a tiger's den to seize food, but the inventory data provided by Briv indicated that the mining efficiency was low and the transportation of ore was inefficient and inconvenient. In fact, the value of the annual output of ore mining was more than 1,000 gold royals, but for the entire stronghold that was only a drop of water in the bucket. The only ones benefiting from this were the partners of the investing aristocracy. In consideration of the long-term development of Border Town, this line of income must be recovered. Roland's mind was clear on the fact that even if these people could fully recover their investment from the last 10 years and longer, they would still not easily let it go. While mosquitoes were small, they were still meat. Besides, this was a seedling that could be useful to make money by reprehensible means. Previously, he was willing to give the investors certain benefits and compensation such as purchasing for half the price and such. However, the case of selling a full ship of ore for only half a ship of cereal, this kind of incident was not allowed to happen again. While Roland was focused on pondering over the list of items, Briv was attentively watching him. In these 3 months, or to be more exact, in the most recent month, some inexplicable changes had occurred to the fourth prince. Perhaps outsiders were still uncertain, but he was by the prince's side every day, so this kind of change could at most keep him for a short time in the dark. During his time in Greycastle, fourth Prince Roland Wimbledon was only known for his bad reputation. He would insist on his own way, behave unscrupulously, without any aristocratic demeanor. Things like that. In short, no big mistakes were made, only unceasing small ones. Compared to his two brothers, his position differed greatly. When His Majesty sent him to Border Town, he was filled with disappointment. If His Majesty hadn't promised him the position of an official finance minister after the fight for the throne, he would have quit and walked away long ago. Early on, in his first 2 months in Border Town, the fourth prince always showed an extremely childish behavior. He managed to offend the local nobility over and over again. Fortunately, the town itself was of a very small scale, so even if all administrative positions were vacated and he had to fill those positions with a dozen civilians, they would still be able to go on. But from now on, it would become something different. When had the change occurred? He thought, it was probably. It was after he saved the witch that the changes appeared. Briv didn't doubt that the devil had the power to enter a body, or that the prince could be manipulated by a hidden witch. But this was extremely unlikely. If the devil and witches had the capability to control someone, why would they choose the fourth prince? Wouldn't it be better to directly control His Majesty or the Pope? Another point which dispelled his doubts was that he had witnessed the prince holding the god punishment lock. This was the church's trump card to handle the witches. The power of any demon would collapse in front of the God punishment lock, but Roland could hold it directly. In other words, in the case that he wasn't the fourth prince, when even God had no power about him, it was needless to fear the Devil King, so was it necessary to expose him. To preserve one's own life was most important. The prince's style still continued in his own way, behaving unscrupulously, yet the feeling Briv got was that both styles were not at all the same. No, Briv thought, it should be the opposite. The biggest difference would be the purpose. He was aware of what Roland was planning to do. In order to achieve the goal, he had to employ some methods which were difficult to understand for ordinary people, like the time when he tried to persuade him to save the witch. Perhaps the planning was not very wise, but the prince really had planned in advance, and believed in the results firmly without any doubt. This ability was the one that caused anyone to feel most puzzled. The title of king might be possible for any of Roland's brothers and sisters, but certainly not for the fourth prince himself. This thing was very clear, because how could he develop such a small place like Border Town? Even the gods couldn't do it. In the end, Roland came up with a crazy plan, the crazy plan to set up a defensive line outside of Border Town, so that they can develop better than the city of Golden Harvest. Was he really thoroughly convinced that this project would be successful? If he was merely a madman, it would be bad enough. But for Roland, who vigorously built the city wall, that did not seem to be the case. He really planned to defend this place, merely with the help of the alchemical product cement, to build a wall, which is for the common sense, almost impossible. Within Briv's family there was also an alchemist, but he had never heard of an alchemical workshop or finding such a thing. The solution for the construction of the wall was based on something no one had seen before. In the end, was he only confident in himself, or was it just his reckless behavior? To what extent did Roland's plan go, and in the end how much do I know of Roland's scheme? Briv found himself interested in the approaching days. Chapter 17 Ambassador, Part 1. This is such a rotten place. When Stronghold emissary Briv stepped out of his cabin, the smell of decayed wood hit him in the face. The surrounding air was damp and oppressive, causing people to feel entirely uncomfortable. He lifted his head up and inhaled through the nose. The sky was completely overcast, and it seemed that heavy rain was incoming. "The last time you came here was a year ago," said the assistant to the ambassador while he graciously put a wool coat on the ambassador's shoulders. "There is nothing here, except stone." "It was a year and a half," Briv corrected. "Every season the Duke chose a different person to come around. The last time I was in Border Town, it was summer. But in addition to ore they have more, like a good variety of furs, and..." "What?" His assistant had a blank look on his face. Briv shook his head and did not answer. He crossed over the side of the ship, stepping on the pier covered with moss, and a plank gave off a creaking sound from under his foot. The wood would probably continue to support the dock for a few years, but then it would break down, he thought. Border Town not only had stone and fur, but even land. But speaking about this hadn't any meaning. The assistant was only an unknown city hall officer. He was unable to see this point. Between Longzong Stronghold and Border Town was a large area of wild land, which still needed to be cleared for cultivation. On one side was the impassable mountain range, while on the other side was the Chishui River, long and narrow like a corridor. As an outpost for the stronghold, if they assumed responsibility of the defensive line, it would also bring the wide expanse of land into the possession of the stronghold. The land had not been cultivated, so it didn't require any recuperation before plowing. Instead, many circles of crops could be planted, and on top of that, it had a natural line of defense on both sides. In the end, to produce enough for everyone to eat, it was not required to expend much effort. The food shortage in Border Town was just a way to relieve the stronghold of the problems caused by a growing population. In the future, Border Town and the stronghold should become one territory, rather than the two separated territories they are now. The only drawback was that it would need a 3 to 5 year long operation, as well as large sums of money in advance. Unfortunately, when talking about the foresight of investment, most of the nobility were bad businessmen. "Hey, how can it be that the yard is empty?" The assistant pointed to a distant piece of land. "Shouldn't they have the ore ready?" Petrov sighed softly. "We will go to the castle, and have an audience with His Royal Highness." "Wait. Mr. Ambassador, do you know if he will receive you?" He didn't know if His Majesty would, but in his heart he didn't want to say it. "Let's go, the stables are just in front." Trouble came now that the stronghold and border town were divided into two separate territories. Because of the king's order to fight for the throne, the fourth prince was left in solitude. How would a normal aristocratic or royal member ever be here? Of course they would take all of this land for themselves. Selling minerals and jewelry in exchange for food and bread? I am afraid that the prince's eyes only can see gold royals. If it was himself, he would do it. To helplessly watch as one's own territory output is exchanged for only food. The ambassador was afraid that nobody would accept this situation. In addition, the products didn't have to go to the stronghold. Most of the nobility forgets the fact that the Chishui River didn't end at the Longzong stronghold. He could sell the ore at market price in Willow Town, in Dragon Mountain, or even in Red City, then take people from their cities as new refugees. It was nothing more than a little further down the river. What could the Longzong stronghold do then? Block the river, and cut off the prince and his party? It would simply be a defiance of the royal family of Greycastle. Everyone knew that the fourth prince was least likely to become the king, but without a doubt, it would still not be good to defy him because he was still of the king's blood. The ambassador and his assistant rode on rented horses, coming slowly forward on the stone road along the river. The stables only had old horses of mixed colors. Even if they rode slowly, the horses would still tremble. And for these two stupid horses, he had still to pay a deposit of 2 gold royals. "You see, sir, is that a boat from Willow Town?" Hearing his aide shout, he looked in the direction he pointed, only to see a ship with a willow leaf on their green banner, hanging on their single pole, slowly sailing down the river. The hull waterline was very high, indicating that it was loaded with cargo. Petrov blankly nodded, but his heart sank. The prince moved faster than he had expected. If the prince had begun to contact those towns and cities downstream, the bargaining chips in his own hands lost value. He originally intended to acquire the ore for 30% lower than the normal price, so that he would still earn something. Not to mention, after the stones were turned into polished jewelry, the price of luxury goods were several times higher. Unfortunately, this was not a monopoly, nor was it only his family who had the final say. Participating in the mining project in Border Town were 6 noble families. If they lacked majority consent, then there would be no resolution. However, they were slow in reacting, thinking that the situation was the same as before. Or, they thought the mining project was not worth that much attention. Anyway, the remaining 5 were indifferent. Even his own father confidently rejected him. In fact, they were wrong. The low reward of the mining output was mainly due to few other trading possibilities. If they transitioned to the normal trade, they could earn more. And if you earn more, you will be likely to produce more ore next year. Could they achieve the monopoly scheme they thought out before? In all likelihood, no, it certainly couldn't be realized. Petrov thought, since he could see the empty yard, the prince did not intend to let these minerals be exchanged for poor quality wheat. He had to contact the other buyers. If they still wanted to hold this line of business, a 30% discount was his best bargaining chip. Since the distance between Willow Town and Border Town was further, this would end in an increase of the transportation costs, but Willow Town had more than one source of ore. The first price they would offer would likely be lower than the market price by half. As for Dragon Mountain and Red Town, the price would be even lower, so the fourth prince would agree to Longzong's stronghold monopoly, especially for the gem trade. But the problem was, If he signed a contract, would his father agree with it? The other 5 families believed that it would be a simple matter to let Border Town surrender, should he dismiss the interests of the family to get the contract. After all, in their eyes, Border Town was still controlled by their own Longzong stronghold, and everything could be given or taken away by them. They slowly crossed the town, heading toward the castle located in the southeast corner. It was not Petrov's first time here, but this time the owner had changed. When the guards saw the ambassador, they immediately went in and informed the lord. 4th Prince Roland Wimbledon quickly summoned Petrov, and when the two were guided into the hall, the prince was already sitting at the main seat waiting. "Mr. Ambassador, please sit down." Roland clapped his hands and let the maid bring hearty meals. Grilled whole chicken, a wild boar leg with mushroom stew, butter bread and a large bowl of vegetable soup. Obviously, in this borderland, the royal children hadn't the slightest impairment of personal enjoyment. Petrov naturally didn't hesitate. He traveled by ship from Longzong stronghold to Border Town, and even with favorable wind it took 2 days. If it was a multi-masted cargo ship, it would have been even slower, maybe 3 to 5 days. There was no kitchen on board, so it usually came with eating dried meat strips or wheat bread. Seeing the billowing hot dishes, he felt saliva surging in his throat. But thanks to years of training and aristocratic culture, he could maintain perfect dining etiquette. On the contrary, His Highness' eating habits were a lot worse, in particular his use of the knife and fork. Petrov noted that in addition to the carving knife, the 4th prince used a pair of small sticks. When the slicing was completed, he used the sticks for all the other moves. And it looked like 2 sticks were much more convenient than a fork. What do you think? At the end of the meal, Roland suddenly questioned the ambassador. What? For a moment the ambassador lost his spirit. Roland shook the hands with the sticks, before answering Petrov, the iron fork, for most people it is a luxury, not to mention a silver fork. When you are eating directly with your hand, it is very easy to put dirty things together with the normal food in the belly. Disease enters by the mouth, you know? The ambassador didn't know how to answer. He didn't understand the meaning of diseases enters by the mouth, but according to his understanding of the previous sentence, Roland was probably referring to the dirt stuck on food, and it would be easy to get sick when eating it. But when someone tried to diagnose the sickness, no one knew the reason why they died. How many sticks do you think you can get by cutting down one oak tree in the forest? These sticks are clean and easy to get. I'm going to promote this in the town. The prince sipped his wine and continued, of course, now my people don't get much meat to eat, but I will slowly change that. Petrov felt relieved. He now knew how to answer. Routinely, he expressed his support and blessing, but in his heart he did not agree. Let all the people have meat? That would simply be whimsical. Even Grey Castle could not do this, and this border town was in this desolate land. Chapter 18 Ambassador, Part 2. The banquet went on. There was a fairly harmonious atmosphere during the dinner. The 4th prince didn't talk about tour trade as he found it inconvenient to say anything. When the prince told the maid to deliver the dessert, Petrov tentatively mentioned the trade. Your Highness, according to the previous procedure, today should be the day when you deliver the ore, but I don't see any ore in the terminal yard. Roland put down his small wood sticks and nodded. Unfortunately, the northern slope mine collapsed a while back. This month my people can only try to resume production. However, the gravel from the collapse has not been cleared yet. According to the schedule, we will be able to start mining again at the beginning of next year. The mine collapsed? For a moment, Petrov was stunned. Was that a coincidence? However, he quickly realized that the prince did not have the need to lie. Otherwise, if he himself went to the North Slope mine, everything would be clear, so it was obvious that with a lie Roland would only beat his own face. Then, what happened to the ore from before the collapse? That wasn't much. The amount mined was according to the convention. My people were unable to mine more than the amount set by the convention. Roland emphasized the words in a practiced manner. Mr. Ambassador, you should also remember what happened during the months of the demons 2 years ago, right? Of course Petrov remembered it. The cold lasted for 4 months and in border town nearly 1 out of every 2 people starved to death. The cause of this was municipal administrative governor Reynolds' avaricious and insatiable greed. Between the aristocracy there was naturally internal opposition, some nobles even wanted to punish Governor Reynolds afterwards. But at the end of this incident nothing happened, only because he was the husband of the Duke's second daughter. Now when this was mentioned by the prince, Petrov got a bad feeling. This time it will be even worse, Roland sighed, with what we could mine before, it was probably only enough for 2 months of food. I will try to support my people, but I'm afraid they won't survive the winter, sir. The old ways of trade must be abolished. Petrov opened his mouth, but he didn't know how to refute. He wasn't a professional diplomat. In face of such a good reason, he really couldn't point out any problems, so he could only delay the matter for the time being. Your Highness, I have to express my regret. This time will not be a repeat of the tragedy before. I can afford to loan you a month of food, and when your people are able to resume production next year, they can slowly repay the debt. I already sold the ore to Willowtown, we can slowly repay you with their money. But. There is no but, however, Roland immediately interrupted him, they are willing to buy the ore with gold royals, and at the same time they sell wheat, cheese, bread, honey and more at market price. Which we can buy with the royals we got from the former transaction. But, Mr. Ambassador, even if you are willing to lend us a month of food, would the other 5 factions agree with your decision? As far as I know, it isn't even easy for Duke Ryan to reach an agreement with the other families. Petrov kept silent, the 4th prince had put it right. Not just the remaining 5, he even feared his own father wouldn't agree. If they wanted to maintain the monopoly, it would be necessary to modify the trading scheme, but he did not know how he could have the last word. He was called an ambassador, but in reality, he was just the spokesperson. Perhaps the Duke did not want someone to come to any private agreements with border town, right? Whether it was during the time of the former governor or now with the 4th prince, he assigned a different candidate every season, and these people were never the rulers of their families. Regardless of the outcome, he had to try, so when he thought up to this point, Petrov spread out his last cards. 30. He held up 3 fingers. Longzong's stronghold will buy the ore and rough gems for less than 30% of the market price. I think this price should be higher than the price of Willowtown, Your Highness. Roland responded, indeed it is higher, but there is still the old question, can you guarantee the agreement of all 6 families? I will immediately go back to Longzong's stronghold tomorrow. After I get an agreement, I will come back with a new contract. But my people are unable to wait that long. You should know, that if you want to reach an agreement between the aristocracy, it is usually very time-consuming. Your Highness, the cooperation with Longzong's stronghold would be a better choice for you and your people. Willowtown is too far away, so you and your people can also escape to them during the months of the demons. When speaking up to this point Petrov felt that his throat became dry, but the road isn't easy. It is quite dangerous. Good God, what the hell am I doing? Petrov's heart pounded madly, did he really threaten the prince? Ha 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 ha. Surprisingly, Roland did not fly into a rage, but instead laughed, Mr. Ambassador, you seem to have mistaken something, I never thought of retreating to Willowtown. What do you mean? Of course, I didn't intend to go to Longzong's stronghold either. Roland watched the ambassador's expression with interest, I'm not going anywhere. Petrov momentarily doubted whether his ears got it right or wrong. Fortunately, the prince didn't let this awkward silence continue for long, and he then explained, this winter, I will always stay in Border Town. Border Town will become the new border of our kingdom. Do not be so surprised, my friend, I'm not spouting nonsense. I can show you the new masonry walls at the northern mountain slope. City wall? Yes, connecting the North Slope Mountain and Shinshui River is a 12-foot high and 4-foot wide stone wall. With this, we can defeat the demonic beasts here at Border Town. Petrov felt his brain power wasn't enough. When the former ambassador got back last season, he did not mention any city walls. No, at that time the Lord of Border Town and the people were at Longzong's stronghold. How could they build the wall with the limited manpower they had? In other words, when the fourth prince arrived, he immediately began to build the city walls. Even so, until now it had only been 3 months, so how could they have built something in this short amount of time? Also, what was it His Highness just said? 12 feet high and 4 feet wide, connecting the North Slope Mountain and Shishui River? Petrov estimated this in his heart. Building a wall of this size wasn't something possible to be done in less than 3 to 5 years, and first of all he did not even have enough stone masons for cutting and grinding so many stones. Even more, Border Town was only a mining town, most of the people living here were only common people. When he hadn't even digested this news, Roland's next sentence also shocked him incomparably. As for the ore sales, starting next year, I will be willing to reduce the price by half, sir, but we will not only sell to Longzong's stronghold, because you don't really need that much ore. I think compared to the low profits of ore, you would prefer some more metal products, such as spades, shovels and the like. Here again he paused, waiting until it seemed like Petrov understood the meaning of his words. As for rough gems, we will sell them in the form of an auction. The businessman with the highest bid will be able to buy them. I would prefer to polish the stones myself, but unfortunately in the current Border Town there is no one with such an ability. But you are saying you have the ability to build the wall in this few months? Petrov's heart nearly burst from anger. And what does he mean, that Longzong stronghold doesn't require so much ore? It's a mere output of 1,000 gold royals. Even if the production would be increased, Longzong's stronghold could double it. 2,000 gold royals cannot be handled by Longzong's stronghold? That is a bit too arrogant. He forced back the grievances of his heart, and tried to maintain a composed look. Everything you said I have remembered, Your Highness. I will immediately go back and negotiate with the 6 families. But, the city walls you mentioned before. I first want to have a look. Of course. Roland smiled, but do not be into too much of a rush, let us first enjoy and finish these kingly flavored pastries. After that, it wouldn't be too late to start, right Mr. Ambassador? Chapter 19 Lessons. After entering winter, the first rain finally fell. The rain had already lasted for 2 days without stopping. Roland leaned over his desk and looked out of the window. The rain was blown upwards by the wind, hitting against the glass again and again, creating bursts of ripples. Under the refraction of the ripples, the image of the small town became distorted. The houses and the streets were bent in deformation, without any regular form. Due to the lack of any effective drainage measures, the stone roads were interlocked with streams of flowing water. From afar, it resembled many brooks of clear and crystalline water. The distant mountains and forests were obscured by mist, and were faintly discernible, just like the border to the human world. If such a landscape was placed into modern times, it would certainly be a tourist attraction, but what Roland wanted to see was a jungle made of concrete and steel. Because of the rain, the city wall construction also had to stop. This let his feeling of success, which he got on the day before yesterday when he discouraged the stronghold messenger, fade away. You just said that the air around us is made up of many different kinds of gases, is that true? Anna's clear voice had interrupted Roland's thoughts, and when he looked towards her, Anna blinked her beautiful blue eyes questionably. Ahem, Miss Anna, you should address His Highness with honorifics, warned Carter from the side. Don't be so particular about it. Roland turned around, she is now my student. During the rain, he had called for Carter and the 2 witches to attend their own class. Yes, he had decided to open a course of natural science. He was inspired by stonemason Carl's college. If even a mason can open a school, then could a mechanical engineer open one too? Why did discrimination exist? Wasn't it because of ignorance? Universal education was at any age the most effective measure to promote the development of civilization. He originally also wanted to call the assistant minister, but since he was busy with other government tasks, he declined. Roland didn't know why, but since the beginning of winter Roland felt that Brove seemed to be filled with special enthusiasm, even almost supervising border town all alone. When hearing of the possibility to learn new knowledge, Anna's eyes immediately sparkled with interest. Nana, who didn't need to treat wounded animals during the lessons, also became very happy. Carter, who was idle at the moment, attended the class to see what new nonsense the prince had thought of. But not long after the class had begun, the knight's eyes became lax. Nana's look also became distant, staring only at the two words national science in a daze. Although it seemed that Anna could not completely understand it, she still tried hard to remember everything. Roland had to pause his lecture for a moment to let the three people digest his teaching. Hearing Anna's question, he smiled and nodded, of course, even though they look alike. Your Highness, I do not understand, since every gas looks the same, how can you know that there are different gases? Carter expressed his doubts. I can even prove it to you. Roland knew that even with these easy-to-understand words, most of the people would be confused by the theories. He decided to use a simple experiment to arouse everyone's interest. A candle, a glass, a basin, a bowl of lime water, these were the things he had prepared in advance. Although at this time they had only pale brown glass, far less transparent than the glass of his former time, it was still transparent enough to be used. After all, this simple test didn't need someone to observe the changing process. Roland had done this test before once. The test results shows that although there was magic in this world, the rules of nature were still the same as on Earth. He asked Anna to light the candles, and then he put it in the basin. When something is burning, it needs to consume gas. This gas is also closely linked with every living organism. If we stop breathing, we will be like this candle. Watch. Roland put the glass on the candle, and after the flame shook 2 times, it soon went out. It exhausts the air, sir, this is not surprising. The chief knight spoke in a disapproving way, of course we will die without air. For example, if we fall into water. Nana also nodded. So, do you think that there in the glass is nothing at all? Roland asked, then he poured the lime water into the basin. The lime water soon flooded into the glass, but it finally stopped when only half was filled. This experiment was so classic that most elementary school teachers like to use it as an experiment to increase the interest of the children in natural science. Roland could still remember the shock he felt when his own teacher had demonstrated it. From then on he embarked on the road of science and engineering, with no way to return. He gently lifted a corner of the glass, and after a few moments bubbles of air could be seen rising out of the lime water. Then, the clear lime water appeared to be a little bit cloudy, and a little white cloud slowly spread within the glass. If there was nothing in the glass, we wouldn't have seen the changes in the lime water and the air bubbles. This shows that the air contains at least 2 different kinds of gases. In fact, burning a candle consumes only a part of the air, while the other part is unable to burn. Though it is colorless and odorless, like the former gas, its nature is the complete opposite. Well, that seems to be the case. Carter thought for a long time to figure out the relationship between the two, but to know this, what is the use of it? If you can get the former gas, you can let the flame burn longer, and when you obtain the other gas, you can quickly extinguish the flames. Anna suddenly said. She was simply a genius. Roland praised her in his heart. Even though there was a small fallacy, when hearing of the different properties of the gases, she could immediately think of several uses. This idea was definitely genius level. Roland knew that she did not receive any modern education, but even without it, she could quickly think of this point, showing her extraordinary logic ability. At least she was far better than this chief knight. Right, It is possible to say that since humans learned to use fire, they were separated from the animals, even though obtaining fire was just a coincidence. Perhaps the lightning hit the trees and lit them, perhaps a rock hit another rock and released a spark. But if no one had noticed it, no one could have tried using it. We would still be the same as the animals. Roland guided them patiently and systematically in the direction he wanted. The goal of this experiment was to show you that curiosity and thinking were the driving forces of human progress. There are many of similar potential forces in nature, only waiting for us to discover and use them. After his speech, Carter still had a doubtful look. Nana was one of those types where it was unknown if they were asleep or awake, and she only looked at Roland with open, unfocused eyes. Only Anna bowed her head, as if she was thinking about something. Well, Roland sighed, indeed, teaching too far ahead of the ideas that they understand will not bring enlightenment, it will only make people feel perplexed. The height of their knowledge determined that they couldn't understand the powerful force of nature unless it was physically in front of them. Then they would understand how amazing the nature of the hidden forces in the world were. At this moment, the kettle hanging from the mantel gave off a clanging sound. It was the sound of a steam pinging against the lid. Ah, the water is boiling. Carter walked over to remove the kettle with a fork, and soon the sound stopped. He took a piece of cloth and wrapped it around the handle, then filled everyone's cups with water. For example, when Roland reached out with his hand to hold the cup, he could feel the temperature of the cup wall. From the first day of using fire, the principle of boiling water was known. Boiling water, hundreds of thousands of people had witnessed this and used it, but no one thought that the gently curling and rising water vapor could also contain such a tremendous amount of energy. In a few hundred years, this would become the driving force behind humankind's development. In a very short period of time, it would change the history of mankind. Although the principle was simple, the problem was not the limited technology. No, the problem was that the first choice for most people was to farm. But Roland was different from them. He thought, this world also had witches. Using magic to fight in a battle? That was only the way of barbarians. With magic someone could create, it could replace some of the key technologies to hasten the process of human development. This was the correct way to use magic. They talked until the sun went down, and after they had eaten dinner together, Roland went to his bedroom. There was no nightlife to speak of in this day and age, people didn't even have a word for it, and everyone went to sleep early. He also considered using his rights as the prince to recruit a maid to do the sport, but in the end he couldn't because he was too thin-skinned to speak out. Just as he had lit the candle in his room, he could hear behind himself the sound of applause. Then someone spoke to Roland. It was a spectacular lecture. I did not expect that His Royal Highness the Fourth Prince was actually a learned man. It was the voice of an unknown woman. Instantly Roland could feel cold sweat. Only God knew how a stranger could get into his room without his knowledge. If not an assassin, what could she be? He immediately ran towards the door. Even before he had the time to put his hand on the doorknob, he could feel a cold wind blow near his ear. He discovered that a silver dagger was firmly inserted into the door. The distance from the dagger to his cheek was only 1 finger wide. Chapter 20 Nightingale. Please don't be impulsive, Your Highness, I don't mean to hurt you, I just came here to talk with you. Heck, was this a way to tell people you want to talk with them? Roland swallowed his fear and slowly turned around. Under the threat of a dagger, he could only give way to the pressure and do what the other side wanted. In the light of the dim candlelight, Roland could see the other. She was sitting on his bed, her body hidden under a robe and her head covered with a hood, so he could not see her real appearance. Her shadow, which was thrown by the candlelight, occupied more than half of the wall behind her. Who are you? I do not have a name, but my sisters call me Nightingale. She stood up and straightened out her robe, then she squatted down on one knee, and unexpectedly gave a standard noble bow. First of all, I'm here to express my gratitude to you, Roland Wimbledon, Your Highness. Show your gratitude? Roland noticed that some lines of her gown, due to the firelight, gave off a unique flash. They formed a pattern of 3 parallel triangles with an eye in the middle triangle. It seemed he had already seen it. The pattern on top of the coin. It is the eye of the Holy Mountain, which is the insignia of the Witch Cooperation Association. In his mind, Brooke's words appeared once again. "You're a witch? Ha ha ha." She issued a series of light laughter. "Your Highness is really knowledgeable." Hearing the other side reveal their identity, Roland breathed a sigh of relief. She was not an assassin sent by his brothers and sisters. "Why has a witch like you come to this remote town in the northern mountain area? I do not know where you heard the news from, but your ability to arrive is too slow. If I really wanted to hang her, she would have been dead long ago." "I know. And if you had really done it, I would never talk with you." Nightingale sat back on his bed. The Witch Cooperation Association does not like to intervene in world affairs, especially with things related to the kingship. Honestly, for a witch to kill a prince, it would not be such hard work, but I want to honor the Witch Cooperation Association. However, if you leave a bad second impression, I can still kill you. This was a hanging threat. Roland tried to ease the mood. "The witch, she is alive and well. I know that, and in addition to her, there is another little girl." She nodded. "I came to this place a week ago, but I did not show myself to you. But I have seen everything you have done. Although I do not quite understand why you are not showing the usual malice against witches, no matter what, on behalf of the Witch Cooperation Association I have to thank you." Since a week ago. Roland rubbed his forehead, but also everything he had done was seen by her? This implied that she was always following him, but he and his guards were completely unaware of her? "Well, stop. Saying that you wanted to talk with me wasn't only for saying thank you, right? Are you already tired of talking with me?" asked Nightingale while taking off her hood. "See, I do not look that awful. I will not scare you away, Your Highness." She was far more than not that awful, you could simply only call her beautiful. As her hood fell, her golden hair instantly cascaded down like a waterfall. The candlelight reflected by her hair made him feel dizzy, with her aquiline nose and her sparkling eyes, instead of Anna's and Nina's slightly childlike look, her features revealed a more mature charm. In this dim light, he could not take a close look, but her well-proportioned facial features were sufficient proof of her beauty. Step by step Roland slowly went over to her, and in the end they were sitting on the bed side by side. Not because he was attracted to her, that would be even dangerous, no, he just simply felt that the other side had no malicious intent. "Now you can talk. Sure enough, you're not afraid of me." Nightingale's voice sounded a little happy. "You and I have already seen those people who react differently. They hate us because they are afraid of us. I can see the fear in their eyes, but in you." She couldn't help herself, she had to reach out and gently stroke his cheek. "Roland, I only see curiosity." Roland embarrassedly coughed twice, and then moved his head away from her hand. "Hey, don't change the atmosphere so much. Just a moment ago you were still an assassin, how can you so suddenly completely change your style?" Fortunately, the other quickly restrained her emotions. "I came here to tell you that I want to take Anna and Nana with me." "No." Roland became frightened, and impulsively responded. Then he was worried that if he refused her altogether, she would be annoyed, so he added, "They have a very good life here, no one can hurt them. Besides, where do you want to take them? There is no other place safer than here. I will take them to the Witch Cooperation Association. After all, their home is there." Despite Roland's denial, Nightingale didn't get angry, instead she still continued to talk with him in a calm tone. "The other members of the Witch Cooperation Association are their companions, and there will be no discrimination or persecution, and they no longer need to disguise themselves. You and the Witch Cooperation Association don't have a fixed home? A month ago, my guards discovered your hiding camp in the forest. They found footprints leading to the north. But in the north, there are only the endless mountains. You're right, The Witch Cooperation Association is hiding somewhere in the mountains. For us witches, it is absolutely safe there. Like a wild man living in the mountains during the winter, in the end, where would you be safe? Do you have clean water? Do you have enough food? Is there a warm shelter? In the months of the demons is coming, the entire Northwest will become a dangerous place. In the end, what? Here Roland suddenly paused. What is it again? What had Bruv said? Only at the Holy Mountain can a witch obtain real peace. The purpose of the Witch Cooperation Association is to find the Holy Mountain together. To hell with it, don't do that. Are you going into the impassable mountain range in search of the Holy Mountain? I am afraid that I can't give you an answer. Nightingale smiled, but her look clearly told Roland that he had guessed correctly. If so, I will never agree. Roland flatly overruled their plan. It is only 2 months until the entire outside world is full of demonic beasts. Even when you can avoid the humans in the mountains, you cannot hide yourself from the demonic beasts. How about this idea? Instead of looking for the Holy Mountain during the winter, you all come to Border Town to get through the winter, and when winter has ended you all can try to find Holy Mountain again. This time it was Nightingale's turn to be stunned. The Witch Cooperation Association should be moved here? You really are an interesting person. For a moment she thought over it, but in the end, she still shook her head. Your Highness, even if you are not afraid of us witches, you can't guarantee it for your people. I'm afraid once we are exposed to the eyes of everyone, the church's minions will soon come to knock on your door. As long as the witches can help us smoothly get through the months of the demons, they will realize that the witches are not the evil ones. Just before Roland could open his mouth to speak, he was stopped by Nightingale. In addition, there is another reason why I want to take the girls away, and it will soon turn into an adult. Adulthood? Yes, it seemed that she could see the doubt in Roland's mind, so Nightingale calmly explained, adulthood is the first hurdle all witches need to cross. The later they cross this hurdle, the harder it becomes to bear. Generally, people usually turn into witches at a younger age than Anna. Your Highness, do you know why we can be regarded as the devil incarnate?